The committee will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. It's our job to work tirelessly in partnership with our Inspector Generals and citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is our mission, this is our calling, and this is my passion. Today's hearing is about restoring the American people's trust in an agency that has developed a well-earned reputation for waste and mismanagement of taxpayers' funds. The Environmental Protection Agency is one of the most powerful and far-reaching agencies, but it is offered too little accountability for how its employees are using their time, taxpayers' money, and in fact often abusing the American people by extending and expanding their jurisdiction. We are not here today to talk about the overreach of policies of the EPA, inventing from thin air regulations that don't exist, proactively abusing citizens trying to create wealth in this country through mining, manufacturing, and agriculture. If only we could. Today, we are here because there's a terrifying truth at the EPA, which is responsible for regulations governing such a large percentage of our economy. The fact that it lacks internal controls to prevent even the most basic fraud and abuse. For example, in October, the committee held a hearing about fraud perpetrated by John Beal, a senior-level EPA employee who worked directly for the now Administrator Gina McCarthy. Beal is claimed to have masqueraded as a CIA employee in order to steal time, money, and travel, and even a handicapped parking space from the Federal government. The disguise would have been uncovered by anyone who was looking for someone abusing the trust of the American people. Beal's scam went on far more than 10 years without anyone at the EPA catching on. Even the bold-faced lies, the most outrageous, were not detected. Americans were so shocked that even The Daily Show with Jon Stewart referred to Beal's scam as a web. Stewart questions how Beal could fool so many people at the EPA for so long. And I would too, except for what we're going to hear today, because today we are going to understand that John Beal's behavior did not happen in a vacuum. In fact, it was just the tip of EPA's fraudulent iceberg. This morning we'll hear more stories from the EPA about that will appall and bewilder the American people. It's hard to shock the American people about waste, fraud, and abuse in government, but I believe we will achieve that today. For example, one senior-level EPA employee sold jewelry, pocketbooks, and weight loss products out of her office. She hired friends and even her own daughter, paid for paid internships and steered bonuses toward her own daughter. Also, an EPA employee who she thinly veiled was coming from another part not under her control under the anti-nepotism law, except as you will hear today, the bonus came from her budget. But instead of being reprimanded, she received the highly prestigious Presidential Rank Award and $35,000 in special bonus. This senior manager, this woman, this mother of a child who was unlawfully and unreasonably hired and bonused by her own mother, is still at the EPA and is an employee today. Another woman began working from home 20 years ago because of her multiple sclerosis. But she stopped producing any product more than 5 years ago. She didn't even access her emails. But her supervisors fraudulently kept signing off on her time cards. So she kept getting paid. Over the past year, she has been paid roughly $600,000. But that's not enough for the EPA. She received a performance award during this time. The EPA is an organization in which you can get a special award for not working at all. Our sympathies go out to someone suffering from an awful disease. They should be taken care of, and the government has programs to do so. But fraudulently claiming the person is at work and bonusing them is a crime that doesn't get punished at all at the EPA, not by criminal prosecution and certainly not by termination. Then there's a GS-15 EPA employee who kept receiving normal paychecks for 1 to 2 years after moving into a retirement home. We're talking nursing home here, folks, not one of those places where you golf every day. From the nursing home, even though he did not work during any of that time, he continued to receive pay. Again, falsified documents. His bosses knew it. When the IG began its investigation, his supervisor simply placed him on sick leave. One crime followed by another cover-up. Today we will also hear from Beth Craig. I'm sorry, I apologize. We will hear about Beth Craig. She is a Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Office of Air and Radiation who is still working at the EPA even though the IG found she exercised a severe lack of due diligence by signing off, yes, on CIA agent Mr. Beale's travel. Furthermore, John Beale abuse of retention bonuses. And I want everyone to understand, retention bonuses are supposed to be uniquely paid for somebody that has to be kept that would otherwise retire. Abuse of retention bonuses that he did not deserve prompted the EPA IG to launch, as you might imagine, an audit which found John Beale was not the only offender. Over the last 8 years, EPA paid retention bonuses to 13 additional employees, which totaled more than $660,000. In 11 of the 13 cases, the EPA made unauthorized payments, which cost more than $481,000. Additionally, in the wake of Mr. Beale's fraudulent travel, EPA IG looked into passport controls at EPA for the use of official passports. And for the American people, these are second passports. They're not the blue ones that Americans can carry. These are ones that identify someone as official government employees on official duty, and they're a different color. They're red. The review found that out of 417 official passports belonging to the EPA, 199 could not be located. This is truly a broken agency. We know about these issues because of the tenacity and the hard work of our Inspector General and his staff. Today's hearing is even more important because EPA leadership has engaged in an effort to keep the IG from doing its job. The Office of Homeland Security within EPA, the Office of Homeland Security, a small organization, not the big Homeland Security, a small one within EPA, has been obstructing the Inspector General's work. In fact, one of our witnesses today was verbally assaulted by an employee of the Office of Homeland Security while simply trying to get him to sign a perfunctory form. Under the Office of Inspector General, until the Office of Inspector General is allowed to do their job to the extent authorized and mandated under the IG Act. We will never know more about John Beale and cases like that. I didn't pull any punches today, but there's a lot more material that could have been included. The EPA has a long history that now has become intolerable to the American people. As I said in the first part of my opening statement, the abuses of the EPA that are policy-driven are not the subject today, although they are real. But the waste, fraud, and abuse, the criminal conduct, and the fact that its senior management obviously is part of that activity is now intolerable. With that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The EPA Office of Inspector General has expressed serious concerns that deserve serious attention by this committee so as we might be effective and efficient. The IG asserts that information he considers relevant to his mission is being withheld by the EPA. The IG also believes that the EPA's Office of Homeland Security is engaged in investigations that exceeds its authority. Those disputes do happen. They even happen here on Capitol Hill. These concerns are symptoms of a jurisdictional dispute caused by a difference in interpretation of two statutes, the Inspector General Act of 1978 and the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year. Under the Inspector General Act, the IG has broad authority to investigate cases of employee misconduct. Yet, Federal courts have ruled that this authority may be limited in certain cases involving national security. In addition, under the Intelligence Authorization Act and various presidential executive orders and directives, the EPA has certain national security responsibilities to refer cases to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The dispute lies at the intersection of these two laws. The two offices do not agree on what role the IG should play in these cases or what obligations the EPA has to keep the IG informed of actions relating to referrals made to the FBI. Passions have run high during this dispute and even resulted in an altercation between special agents of the IG and the staff of the Office of Homeland Security. That is most unfortunate. There are several ways to resolve this issue. One way is to wait for a Federal court to decide the matter. Another way is for Congress to enact new legislation. Both of these options will take a long time, and cooperation between the EPA, the IG, and the FBI will suffer in the meantime, and the people will not be properly served. A better way is to find a practical solution that will allow all parties to win. I believe this committee can do that by helping them craft a plan that will clarify their roles and responsibilities, require the most information sharing possible, and ensure better cooperation going forward. In preparation for today's hearing, I asked my staff to work with all the parties to help find a solution. My staff spent many hours discussing the issues with various stakeholders, trying to find not only common ground, but higher ground. Based on my staff's discussions with the parties, I believe that there are significant areas of agreement, and I would like to confirm this progress here today, again, so that we might be effective and efficient in what we're trying to do. First, I believe all parties agree that the FBI, as the lead agency for national security investigations, should be directly involved in the discussion to resolve their concerns. Second, if the FBI is not leading an investigation into employee misconduct, it is properly the lead role of the IG and not the EPA's Office of Homeland Security. Third, the Office of Homeland Security has an intelligence support function to perform. including intelligence analysis. And fourth, better information sharing between the EPA and the IG will help ensure that the deconfliction occurs, which will protect investigations from being compromised or agents from being endangered. Those are areas of agreement that I think we have already achieved. If you all can confirm those today, I believe we will have a strong foundation for a positive resolution. I was also pleased to hear that yesterday, senior leadership of the EPA and the IG, as well as the FBI, scheduled a meeting next week to work towards a resolution of this dispute. Again, this is an effort to get it done, to resolve the issue. I believe that all the parties involved here are hardworking Federal employees that simply want to do their job in an effective and efficient manner, and we should be about the business of trying to help them do that. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. At this time, I'd ask unanimous consent that the portions of the Inspector General Act of 1978 which state and list the agencies that are allowed to have exemptions, which are the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Justice, Treasury, plus the United States Postal Service and Federal Reserve, noting that the creation of the Homeland Security Act was what created that exemption afterwards. And with that, thank you. Members may have 7 days in which to submit opening statements for the record. We are now pleased to welcome our panel of witnesses. Mr. Patrick Sullivan is the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations for the Office of Inspector General at the EPA. Mr. Alan Williams is the Deputy Assistant Inspector General for OIG, Office of Inspector General at the EPA. Ms. Elizabeth Heller is the Special Agent at the Office of Investigations of the Office of Inspector General at the EPA. She is here today to provide testimony as a private citizen, although I'm going to codify that by saying her experience, well, in fact, as an agent that she then was put through is also part of her testimony. The Honorable Robert Principi, I'm sorry, I always go back to Secretary Principi, Anya, and I apologize, is the Deputy Administrator at the EPA, and we welcome you for being here. Pursuant to the rules, all witnesses are to be sworn. Would you please rise to take the oath? Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. 3 out of the 4 of you are, quite frankly, career opening statement people. It's part of your job. Ms. Heller, I know that yours is a little less scripted and organized. For that reason, I would ask that you all remain as close as you can to 5 minutes. Ms. Heller, if you need a little more time, you'll be granted it. And with that, Mr. Sullivan, you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. I am Patrick Sullivan, Assistant Inspector General for Investigations at EPA. Thank you for inviting me to testify. We are here today because the EPA OIG's Office of Investigations is being impeded from fulfilling its responsibilities by actions of the EPA's Internal Office of Homeland Security, also known as OHS, a unit within the Office of the Administrator. As I testified before you in October on the John Beale case, prior to EPA officials contacting the OIG about the situation involving Mr. Beale, OHS conducted its own investigation. The OHS actions, which included several interviews with Mr. Beale, delayed and damaged the OIG's subsequent investigation. I would like to go on record today and state that, as the official in charge of internal investigations at the EPA, I am very concerned that vital information regarding suspected employee misconduct is being withheld from the OIG. Because OHS continues to block my office's access to information essential to the OIG's work, I cannot assure the committee that we are doing everything possible to root out other John Beals who may be at the EPA or uncover other malfeasance of a similar magnitude. I believe that the current situation represents a significant liability for the EPA, the Congress, and the American taxpayers. In short, the actions of OHS violate the IG Act, the very legislation that Congress passed to ensure Federal agencies have oversight. The EPA OIG was created pursuant to the IG Act and thereby has statutory authorities to conduct investigations of employee misconduct, threats against EPA personnel and facilities, and intrusions into EPA computer networks and systems. Pursuant to the Attorney General's guidelines for OIGs with statutory law enforcement authority, the EPA and the FBI share concurrent jurisdiction for agency-related cases. OHS serves as the agency's central liaison for Homeland Security matters. The OHS has no law enforcement or investigative authority. The most critical concern for the OIG is the safety and security of all EPA employees, facilities, and assets. The OIG's ability to investigate threats against EPA employees and facilities has been impeded due to OHS's total and systematic refusal to share threat information. In investigating threats, timely access to all available information is critical. OHS's stance places my special agents at unnecessary risk. Most important, the withholding of threat information from the OIG also places all EPA employees and facilities at risk. This practice is not only unacceptable, it is dangerous. The current situation with OHS harks back to the days before 9/11, when U.S. government entities often did not communicate effectively or at all, contributing to the most horrific terrorist attack ever on U.S. soil. No single entity can accomplish its work in a vacuum. We must work together. In response to denying the OIG's repeated requests for information and cooperation, OHS has invoked the term national security as its mantra. This formidable cloak does not justify OHS's insistence on filtering information germane to the OIG's jurisdiction, whether classified or not. OHS does not have authority to make such a call. Agency management, let alone a small shop like OHS buried inside the agency, has no power whatsoever to tell the OIG what it needs to know. It is actually the reverse. Under the IG Act, the OIG has access to the entirety of information available to the agency, and it is the IG who determines what information it needs to know. In fact, EPA's own Office of Environmental Compliance and Assurance issued a legal opinion holding that OHS lacks both statutory law enforcement authority and the authority to assign an EPA Criminal Investigations Division special agent to work as a criminal investigator within OHS. This special agent, who carries a gun and a badge, routinely conducts national security and misconduct investigations for OHS. Over the past few months, I discussed this situation with many of my fellow Assistant Inspectors General for Investigation in the Federal OIG community. I learned that the situation I face at EPA is an anomaly. Most of my counterparts advised me that their offices of investigation would either directly participate with the FBI in any such national security-related investigation targeting an employee, or they would be fully informed about the investigation for coordination and deconfliction purposes. In addition, the use of non-disclosure agreements by an internal entity, such as OHS, to prevent employees from speaking to the OIG would not be tolerated. In summary, we need Congress's help in rectifying the situation. The OHS's refusal to share information must be addressed and corrected immediately. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. I am Alan Williams, Deputy Assistant Inspector General for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today to discuss our investigations of employee misconduct involving time and attendance fraud. The Office of Inspector General is an independent entity within EPA. Therefore, the views expressed in my testimony are based on the findings of the OIG's work and are not intended to reflect the views of the agency. The OIG's successful investigation of John Bill was the subject of a hearing held by this committee on October 1, 2013. On December 18, 2013, Mr. Bill was sentenced to 32 months in prison for defrauding the EPA of approximately $900,000 in undeserved pay and bonuses. Our investigation found, among other things, that Mr. Bill received this salary while missing more than 2.5 years of work with EPA, making this case one of the most notorious time and attendance fraud cases in the Federal Government. My role here today is to inform the committee about findings from several time and attendance investigations, both related and unrelated to Bill. First, the OIG investigated an allegation of serious employee misconduct by an EPA senior executive alleged to have directly involved in approving fraudulent time and attendance records and travel vouchers for Mr. Bill. Our investigation was able to substantiate that this senior executive did not exercise due diligence with respect to the authorization and approval of Mr. Bill's time and attendance records, travel authorizations, and travel vouchers. The investigation also revealed that the senior executive did not exercise due diligence in part because she believed Mr. Bill worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. She never questioned Mr. Bill. Consequently, she authorized and approved fraudulent time and attendance records and travel vouchers in excess of $180,000. Similarly, the OIG conducted an investigation into serious misconduct by another EPA manager who allowed an employee to stay at home and not report for duty for several years. Based on a long-standing arrangement with the employee, which allegedly began as an accommodation to work at home due to a medical condition, this manager not only entered fraudulent time and attendance records for the absent employee, but also approved the same records. It is estimated that the manager's approval of fraudulent time and attendance records cost the government more than $500,000. What is even more egregious is that the EPA manager authored and approved exemplary performance appraisals that resulted in a cash award for the absent employee. During the same investigation, the OIG found evidence that implicated an EPA executive. This executive, who was the absent employee's prior supervisor, remained aware of the employee had been in a telework status for more than 20 years with very little substantive work product to show during this time. The executive took no action, even though he knew the EPA was being defrauded. Upon receiving a target letter from the U.S. Department of Justice, the executive retired and was not prosecuted. Furthermore, the Department of Justice declined to prosecute either the absent employee or the current supervisor. In addition to those cases, the OIG has several ongoing investigations involving employees and alleged serious misconduct. One of the investigations involves a career employee who has allegedly stored pornographic materials on an EPA network server. When an OIG special agent arrived at the employee's workspace to conduct an interview, the special agent witnessed the employee actively viewing pornography on his government-issued computer. Subsequently, the employee confessed to spending on average between 2 and 6 hours per day viewing pornography while at work. The OIG's investigation determined that the employee downloaded and viewed more than 7,000 pornographic files during duty hours. This investigation has been referred to and accepted by the Department of Justice for prosecution. Finally, the OIG has an ongoing investigation of a GS-15 Step 10 EPA employee who has a debilitating disease and has not been physically able to complete any work for at least a year. However, this employee continues to draw a full salary and receive the benefits of an active employee. This employee has resided in an assisted living facility for more than a year, and the former supervisor was aware of the situation and the employee's condition. This investigation is ongoing and is yet to be presented to the Justice Department for prosecution. These are recent examples of OIG employees' misconduct cases at the EPA. True deterrence of employee misconduct ultimately rests with the agency's executives and managers to set a tone that ensures such behavior will not be condoned. By doing so, the agency's leadership can establish a culture of accountability within the EPA and clearly communicate that employee misconduct will not be tolerated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to discuss some of our cases involving employee misconduct at the EPA. The OIG appreciates the committee's continued interest in our work. This concludes my testimony, and I am pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Heller. Your microphone, please, and pull it a little closer. It'll help.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the Oversight Committee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. My name is Elizabeth Heller Drake, and I'm a Special Agent in the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Inspector General. I am testifying about what happened to me as a federal law enforcement officer last fall, and I appear before you voluntarily as an individual and not on behalf of the agency nor on behalf of the OIG. No one at EPA has pre-approved my statement. On Thursday, October 24, 2013, fellow EPA OIG Special Agent Ryan Smith and I had a difficult interview with EPA Office of Homeland Security employee John Martin. We extended him the courtesy of having his personal attorney present, but he wouldn't answer even basic questions. He kept indicating he needed to be home to meet his children, so we ended in a timely fashion in spite of his lack of cooperation with our official investigation. Minutes after he left, I realized he left without the standard warning not to discuss the ongoing investigation with others and without signing the standard nondisclosure form. Agent Smith was escorting Martin's attorney out of the building, and I was unable to reach her by phone, so I asked Special Agent Gary Don Dorman to go with me to the EPA Office of Homeland Security to notify Martin of his obligations. As we progressed into OHS's office suite, someone asked if Agent Dorman and I needed assistance, at which point I also overheard Mr. Martin's voice talking to someone about specific information discussed during our interview of him. Turning in the direction of his voice and looking down the hallway, I saw Mr. Martin standing in the open doorway of an office talking to a woman I later learned was Nancy Dunham from the EPA's Office of General Counsel. With them was someone I later realized was EPA Senior Intelligence Advisor Stephen Williams. Mr. Martin approached Agent Dorman and me and asked what we wanted. I responded that we had a follow-up item to address with him that would only take an additional moment of his time. Mr. Martin seemed defensive and responded that he didn't want to discuss anything without his attorney present. I explained there was no intention to ask him additional questions, but we merely needed his attention for a quick aside. Following protocol, I was trying not to unnecessarily disclose the ongoing investigation to others in the area. Martin said anything I had to say to him could be said in front of all present. Keeping my composure, I informed him that he wasn't permitted to discuss details of our interview with anyone other than his personal attorney. Ms. Dunham and Mr. Williams shouted that my instructions weren't accurate, at which point it became clear Mr. Martin wasn't going to sign our standard nondisclosure form. I responded to Mr. Martin that I heard him talking about our interview when Agent Dorman and I entered the office space and that he needed to desist from that type of dialogue immediately. I repeated that Mr. Martin should only discuss the interview details with his personal counsel. As I made those statements, Ms. Dunham continued to yell from down the hallway that I wasn't right. At this time, Mr. Williams aggressively approached me, yelling, "Put it in writing." He stepped between me and Mr. Martin in a menacing way, again screaming to put it in writing and demanding to know where the standard protocol I was addressing was documented. Williams invaded my personal space, pointing and yelling to a degree that it became difficult to understand what he was saying. He repeatedly jabbed his finger at me merely inches from my chest, and as he got more aggressive, his complexion heated, his veins bulged, and he began to sweat profusely. We're trained to deal with difficult circumstances. However, I was surprised at having this situation escalate so quickly in a professional setting over a request that was so standard and minor. If an individual had acted this way toward me as a federal agent on the street, I might have arrested him, but it shocked me to be approached in this manner by what appeared to be a high-ranking EPA official. While Mr. Williams is not a large man, his inexplicable anger and aggressiveness in this professional office setting managed to leave me feeling intimidated. The fact I had a sidearm holstered out of sight under my suit jacket didn't make a difference. I wasn't chasing a criminal on the street, but rather in an environment where I would never have expected such behavior from a professional staff member. Avoiding unnecessary physical contact, I stepped back from Mr. Williams. I tried to de-escalate the incident by asking Mr. Williams to identify himself. Remaining professional, and upon hearing his name, I responded, "Mr. Williams, I'm Special Agent Elizabeth Drake. It's so nice to meet you." And I put my hand out to shake his. He refused to shake my hand and instead responded, "I don't want to know you." In spite of my clear notice that I was a federal law enforcement officer, he again started yelling at me. I thought back to my research and recalled that he wasn't only a GS-15, but he was also a Naval Reserves captain, making his tirade and interference with my official duties all the more surprising. In another effort to reduce the tension, I told Mr. Williams that I wasn't there to speak with him, at which point he screamed at Agent Dorman and me to get out of their office space. He continued to yell as we departed. Back at the office, we reported the assault to management, leading other agents to return to the Office of Homeland Security to investigate Mr. Martin. Martin had left. Ms. Dunham and Mr. Williams said they were too stressed to be interviewed. The case was turned over to the Federal Protective Service to investigate. They interviewed Agent Dorman and me, as well as the OHS staff member who had offered us assistance when we first arrived that evening of the 24th. FPS then prepared an affidavit in support of Mr. Williams' arrest for the D.C. offense known as intent to frighten assault, but the U.S. Attorney's Office decided to refer it back to EPA for handling through administrative action. Whether Mr. Williams attacked and intimidated me that evening because I am a female and so felt he could get away with it, and whether he has acted in a threatening manner towards other females in the workplace are questions for another time and place. I instead am here to relay what happened that night and EPA's response to it out of concern about OIG not being allowed to do its job. Was Mr. Williams put on paid administrative leave until a full inquiry could be completed? No. Was I allowed to resume the OIG investigation involving Office of Homeland Security staff? No. Did the Yes. In fact, the only prompt concrete action taken by the EPA was to issue a stand-down memo days later that halted the OIG investigation until a plan could be developed and put in place to end ongoing conflicts between the EPA's Offices of Homeland Security and of the Inspector General. As my attorney and I told the administrator's staff, we know of no exemption in the law that says an agency head can halt an official OIG investigation so long as it's done to encourage investigators and their targets to get along better with each other. It is common in our line of work to remain professional in spite of conflict. It's not common for a GS-15 official to interfere, then essentially be rewarded with an investigation being halted for what has been over 6 months. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cummings, We are now more than 6 months out from the events of October 24th, yet I believe the investigation underway the day of the assault continues to go uninvestigated. If there were wrongdoings going on within EPA's OHS, as an OIG agent, I feel responsible to conclude my investigation and bring those issues forward. However, I find it equally as important to determine that if there were no wrongdoings within the office identified, to set the record straight in that regard as well. To be clear, I'm not complaining about the actions of the EPA Inspector General or his staff. They have been very supportive of my career, especially so during the difficult months since I was assaulted in the line of duty. I'm also not out to harm EPA. On the contrary, it's because the Environmental Protection Agency's work is so important that the agency must be given the best chance possible to succeed. That only can happen if there is a healthy, independent, and unobstructed OIG, an OIG whose agents can insist upon cooperation from the agency's employees regardless of their seniority and regardless of the office that happens to be the one subject to our law enforcement authority on a given day. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have for me.
Thank you. Mr. Persisepi, please feel free to, your entire opening statement is in the record. You feel free to include any answers to the testimony you've just heard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may, given I have a slight cold, I may have to cough and take a sip every once in a while here, but
coughing is fully authorized here.
Fully authorized, and I appreciate that. Let me go through my written statement, and maybe I'll add a few comments, but I'm sure we'll get into it in the questions and the answers, as I do want to be able to respond and explain what we are doing to deal with some of these issues that have come up here. Far be it for us to be in a situation where we do not want to have a problem with the IG's access to whatever they need to have in the agency. That is our position. That is Gina McCarthy's position, and I want to assure the committee of that. That goal is paramount for us. Having an independent and healthy IG is what we need to be able to deal with some of the issues you have in any large institution, to make sure we're dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse. And we see the Inspector General as a partner in that. In fact, since 2009, employees of the EPA have provided their information, their knowledge, and their support to over 2,600 audits, investigations, and actions of the Office of the Inspector General. I want you to keep that context in mind. Many of these identified in-house actions that have persisted for a long time in the agency and require a systemic improvement in management systems in the agency. And we have stepped up to meet those challenges and remedying them. Agency employees routinely work cooperatively to provide information to the Inspector General to ensure their important work is achieved. That has always been not only our policy, but our culture. Unfortunately, these questions that are being raised about that commitment in light of some of these instances are not the norm. The vast majority of the work we do at the IG is done efficiently, appropriately, and with good result. And I can assure the committee that EPA remains committed to ensuring that our Office of Inspector General is successful in its efforts to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in every program across the agency, without exception. I was last before this committee, as you've mentioned, in the fall to talk about the criminal fraud of John Beale, and all of us at the agency, and I want everyone to know this, are profoundly offended by the actions of Mr. Beale. But I want you also to know that the agency has risen to the occasion to that massive fraud with steady action to make improvements. In December of 2013, we released a 19-page report on evaluation and corrective actions we've already started to take that I testified to when I was before the committee in October. That document evaluated each of the aspects of Mr. Beale's conduct, how Mr. Beale evaded the agency's existing controls, and the agency's planned corrective actions. Since that time, we have taken steps to put measures in place to help ensure that this type of fraud cannot be repeated. In April, we completed a second review of the issues raised by the case, entitled Report on Internal Control Assessments of EPA's Sensitive Payment Areas. This 50-page report uses the assessment processes outlined by the Government Accountability Office's Standards for Internal Control of Federal Government to analyze 7 key areas: executive payroll approvals, employee departures, statutory pay limits, parking and transit subsidy, retention incentives, travel reimbursements above per diem rate, and executive travel approval. That report was also provided to the Office of Inspector General on April 17th of this year. While undertaking our review, if you recall at my hearing with you, I said we are anxious and continue to work directly with the IG on their ongoing administrative reviews of issues that came up in the Beal matter. We also were not going to wait because we didn't want anything else to happen, so we started working on it as well. So we're working in parallel and in tandem in a very cooperative way. And we've provided the Office of Inspector General with any necessary assistance in their ongoing audits related to this matter. Indeed, to ensure swift response to their needs, the EPA has requested and the IG has agreed to biweekly meetings between the IG and all of our senior managers that are related to the programs that are involved. These meetings are attended by senior officials from every office, and they're designed to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks as we're working together. In over a decade of service at EPA, I'm not aware of another instance where we have committed this level of senior-level involvement in a single audit and set of reviews by the Office of Inspector General. In fact, there will be a series of audits. Some have started to come out. So we're looking forward to receiving them, as I said before, and working with them, but we're also doing our own work at the same time so we can stay ahead of the curve and bring all of it together to continue to improve our management processes. Finally, I just want to take this opportunity to recognize that the overwhelming majority of hardworking 16,000 EPA employees are dedicated, hardworking, professional, and public servants, a point at which I know the Inspector General agrees. I'm very proud of them, and I'm very proud of EPA's achievements in protecting human health and the environment. And they've also protected the American people. Employees work every day to make those achievements possible, and we work every day on numerous projects, reviews, and audits with the Office of Inspector General in a cooperative, productive, and appropriate manner. I look forward to answering any of the questions you have.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to recognize a distinguished panel of members of the Army, or I guess Army War College, in spite of the various uniforms, but you'll notice that there are more Army uniforms there. They're here to observe the workings of Congress. Let's try not to disappoint them in any negative way. For years, Congressman Todd Platts represented the Carlisle Barracks, so I think they've had a tradition of coming here, and hopefully you'll find this esteemed body not to disappoint you, depending upon your expectations. I'll now recognize myself for a series of questions. Mr. Sullivan, let me understand something you said in your opening statement. This office, this, I understand, 10 or so men and women office, is, although statutorily authorized to exist and has existed, has no statutory authority to be a law enforcement organization.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the creation of the office was at the discretion of the Administrator. I don't think there was any statutory requirement to have an Office of Homeland Security. But the second part of your statement is absolutely correct. They have no authority whatsoever to do law enforcement or investigative work.
So unlike the uniformed service next to us who pack heat when they go into combat, these people have guns without any congressional requirement that they exist as a law enforcement entity in any way, shape, or form. How do they get those guns?
Well, there is only one employee, to my knowledge, that has a firearm.
He's got a gun and a badge.
Yes, he does.
Who the heck came up with the badge? What does it look like?
He has a badge that identifies him as a special agent in the EPA Criminal Investigations Division.
So they made up their own badge and
no, sir.
authorization?
No, sir. He was employed by the EPA Criminal Investigations Division, and he was transferred to the Office of Homeland Security. Now,
So
the folks,
he shows a gun and a badge from a different part
Yes.
that he's not actually part of. What's that gentleman's name?
his name is John Martin.
Okay, so John Martin, we've heard about him before.
Yes.
I'm sure we'll get back to that in a moment. Mr. Persisipi, you were here before, and we asked you about retention bonuses, and you failed to note that these other ones had existed. I understand they were dropped just before the hearing. I'm disappointed that you wouldn't have been more forthcoming, but I've got other questions today. Quite frankly, how much pornography would it take for an EPA employee to lose their job? We've just heard from Mr. Williams that you know and have known that somebody is searching up, what, 600 sites in a 4-day period, thousands of them, putting pornography, perhaps illegal pornography, but certainly I didn't know there were 627 sites that somebody could surf in a 4-day period, but apparently there are. You know that, and that person's still on the job. Why? What does it take for you to take somebody off of a computer when you discover they're doing it, and actually when the IGs walk in and find it?
First, let me say, I do want to say something about the
Well, answer how much pornography it takes to get fired at the agency first.
We have a service that we employ in our computer system to block pornography.
Ain't working so well, is it?
Well, the world out there stays ahead of it, and we're always constantly trying to catch up. So I want the committee to understand that our first line of defense is to block things like pornography or gambling sites from coming in to the agency, and we do a pretty good job of that, but we have now discovered with the help of the IG that there's some other site that we hadn't had on that, and we are now in the process of working to block that. You know, I wish I could offer my thoughts on this, but this is going to go either to a court or it's going to have an administrative process, and employees have—
Is this employee still being paid? Is this employee still at work?
I believe yes.
Okay. Enough said that, I'm sorry, that's not good enough for the American people.
I can't answer because I will, on what my feelings are on what should happen, because I'm going to corrupt the integrity of the administrative processes, and then we'll have even more trouble down the road. And I know you understand that, but I know your frustration.
Okay, but according to what we're being told, for example, this individual spent 4 consecutive hours on a site called Sadism is Beautiful. I'm going to tell you something. I'm not real up on this. I've been out of the business world for a number of years, but I've got a strong feeling that the House of Representatives figured out how to block sites with titles like that. It would shock me that they wouldn't. But it shocks me that you could tell us that you do a pretty good job, and something as explicit as those key words, or bear so horny, or I'm not going to go into the other names that disgust me. You are running an organization in which nobody can be fired. I'm just going to go through 2 quick questions. One, isn't it a crime to falsify records saying someone's working when they're not? Yes or no? Ms. Heller, isn't it a crime for someone to say that an employee is working when they're not and get them paid for it, in your experience as an agent?
It would be fact-based, and I would—
Mr. Williams, is it a crime to let someone get paid for not working at the EPA or in the Federal Government? Is it a crime to falsify documents saying somebody is in fact working when they're not working and not even able to work?
It can be prosecuted if DOJ deems it necessary to be prosecuted, or it could be—
Yeah, but I'm not asking you if it can be prosecuted. Then there's an 18 U.S.C. There's a title that says it's a crime, right?
For falsifying documents, depends on the document that you're falsifying.
Well, let me explain something. If you commit fraud and send money to somebody else, In the private sector, you get sued, you get fired, and you usually get prosecuted, or at least your employer tries to. If you pay your daughter clandestinely a bonus with anti-nepotism laws that exist in the Federal Government, you do that in the private sector, you get prosecuted. So I'm a little disappointed that we have to get into it's all fact-based. People defrauded the American people. They defrauded the American people, and I'm hearing, according to your IG, they're still on the job. Ms. Heller was attacked, assaulted, and 6 months later, you still have a stand down on the investigation that they were doing, so that an agency that's not even authorized to be a law enforcement agency can continue doing investigations directly on behalf of the administrator. I am shocked, I am appalled, and this is why you're here. And yes, you're going to be coming back to Congress for a long time, because it's clear you are not cooperating with your own IG. You are blocking the IG's investigations. Your testimony is not credible, and I'll give you an opportunity to respond to why you think you're credible while in fact you're not. Anytime you want to respond, Ranking Members.
I appreciate you letting me respond. Well, let me just say, yes, things are fact-based, but it is a crime to falsify Federal documents. I mean, that's an established fact. You know, how that crime is prosecuted, what happens is all fact-based. So I just want to be clear. I understand that, Mr. Chairman. On this incident, let me just say it is disturbing to me, and I am upset that Agent Heller has the feelings of what happened at that evening. You should know, and it's not well publicized, that other employees in that office have filed hostile work environment complaints as well. And so we haven't been doing nothing. We work together with the Inspector General, as Agent Heller identified in her testimony, with the Federal Protection Services. And when they suggested back to the IG that we handle this case administratively, both of us agreed, the Inspector General and EPA management, that we would go to the Council of Inspector Generals for Integrity and Efficiency, SIGI it's called, to get a referral so that we could have an independent IG come in and look at not only the issues surrounding that fact. That investigation is ongoing. The SIGI selected, and we all agreed, to let the Department of Defense Inspector General work on this case, and that is going on. I can't characterize that as being irresponsible. I can't characterize that as not doing anything. I characterize that as looking first and foremost, and I want Agent Heller to know this, that Gina McCarthy and I, first and foremost, are concerned about the safety of our employees. I don't want to put employees in a situation where it's volatile. You know, no matter how many directives I issue, I don't want, employees in that position. So we need to let that investigation that is ongoing now complete, and then we will know how to move forward. And we will move forward expeditiously. We need to fix this situation, and we need to have our employees be able to do their job, whether it's the IG, whether it's Agent Heller, or anyone else.
I appreciate that. A woman was assaulted. A magistrate issued an arrest warrant. There was a decline to prosecute. He is still on the job. He is still assaulting people. He's creating a hostile environment, and you're working on it. And I appreciate that. Ranking Member.
First of all, to Ms. Heller, I think one of the most alarming things that I've heard in being in Congress for 17 years is what you just described. Nobody should have to go through that, period, woman or man, and I'm so sorry that that happened, and we have to do everything that we can to make sure that does not happen. That is not a part of your job description, to go through that kind of hell. And we're going to try to address that, and it's very, very important to me, and I'm sure every member of this panel. Mr. Sullivan and Ms. Heller, you mentioned that the EPA Administrator, Gina McCarthy, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, requested that the OIG stand down on its investigation of OHS and the OHS Special Agent. Is that accurate, Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, the investigation we were conducting was non-criminal. It was administrative. The investigation and an interview with Mr. Martin concerned his authority to act as a criminal investigator within the Office of Homeland Security. We had received a legal opinion from an attorney within the EPA Office of Environmental Compliance and Assurance that Mr. Martin was out of scope. In other words, he was liable personally for a Bivens action, and the agency was liable under the Federal Tort Claims Act because he was operating outside of the scope of his authority. That was the allegation. And we were looking into Mr. Martin's authority to do what he was doing and overall the OHS's authority to be conducting investigations within the purview, ostensibly within the purview of the OIG. Why were they doing that?
Does the administrator have the authority to shut down an investigation? Where would that authority come from?
Well, the administrator asked my boss, Mr. Elkins' concurrence to stand down temporarily until there was a potential resolution of the issue.
All right. So, but it was still been the IG's. The IG said no. They could have gone on with the investigation. Is that
That's correct. Mr. Elkins decided to temporarily suspend it. He made it clear it was a temporary suspension.
All right, Mr. Seppi and Mr. Sullivan, you know, I do believe that both of your officers are honorable, and you're right, and I said it earlier, that we have great Federal employees, all of you, and I thank you. Over the past 10 days, my staff has worked with each of your officers to find areas of agreement. You know, a good friend of mine used to say, a judge friend used to say in disputes, he would say, when elephants battle and fight, the grass suffers. And I believe, you know, there's a way to resolve this, and I'm hoping that we can get there because I want everybody to be able to do their jobs. I don't want the so-called grass to suffer. And when I say the grass here, we're talking about the people of the United States getting their taxpayer dollars worth of services out of the agencies. So, Mr. Sullivan, can you please tell me, first of all, do you think the involvement of my staff was helpful to you? Did it help identify the issues that needed to be resolved?
Yes, sir. It was illuminating, but to be candid here, we've been trying to resolve this issue internally for many, many, many months. We had no progress whatsoever. Your staff, over the weekend, as you know, I spoke to your staff many times over the weekend, and they made a sincere effort, and I was very happy to hear that on the part of the agency, or at least I didn't speak directly to anyone from the agency, but your staff did, and I thought it was very, very encouraging.
Now, Mr. Seppi, what do you think about what's been accomplished?
You know, I want to be clear also that I agree with the IG. Our Office of Homeland Security has no independent authority to do investigations, you know, in the classic law enforcement sense. They certainly have the ability under general purposes to analyze intelligence and do things of that nature, but they don't. And to my knowledge, they do not do investigations independently. They are assisting the FBI. And here is what I think, and you do that as a prelude, Ranking Member Cummings, because the idea that we have right now, and I am appreciative of what Patrick said about how difficult it has been to try to come to grips with this, but Administrator McCarthy is going to meet with Arthur Elkins and with the head of counterintelligence at the FBI on Friday of next week, and we're going to try to create a framework on how we can get these law enforcement activities going on, because it's clear to me, and I think this is a really important thing, that when there is a national security issue that the FBI has asked EPA to help them with, analyzing information, gathering information, perhaps even interviewing people, that there is a possibility, maybe not in every case, but in possibility, and I want to point out also these are very rare that we do, that person or that activity could also be employee misconduct that is completely in the wheelhouse of the Inspector General. So the question really is, how can we get the FBI and the Office of Inspector General together so that we can we can stand down on our side as to what it is we need to do to get those to legitimate and appropriate things to do. Because the people we're talking about we're not trying to hide behind national security. They're working.
So you agree that the FBI needs to be involved?
Absolutely, the FBI.
Would you agree, Ms. Sullivan, that the FBI needs to be involved?
Yes, sir, but there are other issues that do not involve the FBI. Other issues involve the Secret Service, U.S. Marshal Service, Capitol Police. So it is really, of course, the broad spectrum of federal law enforcement where OHS is restricting our information, not just with the FBI.
I see. Let me give you, before I forget this, Mr. Persepi?
You guys can, I know, you
Okay.
guys can just call me Bob P.
Okay, Mr. P. Let me ask you this. Some kind of way, if we got employees who are watching pornography for 4 hours to 6 hours a day or whatever it was testified to, we got to address that. Mr. P,
Yes.
Did you hear me? Did you hear what I said?
Yes, I did.
But that needs to be addressed. And I think the chairman asked you whether that person was still earning a salary, and you said yes.
Yeah, you all have more information than I do on this case. The IG has informed me of this case, but I have no other information on it. I don't know what sites they were looking at. All I know, and so I have no report. I have no information. I have nothing to act on other than a meeting in my office telling me that they're investigating this person. Now, you know, I'm happy to sit down with them and look at it further. I'm happy to look at what administrative processes we can take. But remember, you know,
Mr. P, I'm just trying to send a message back to the agency. We got to deal with that. That makes absolutely no sense. And do you both agree that the EPA's Office of Homeland Security has an intelligence support function to perform, including intelligence analysis? Sullivan?
Yes, sir, I do, but in a limited role without having someone with a gun and a badge conducting investigations.
What about you, Mr. P?
I agree that they have the authority to do the analysis and the work. I think the key is what can they do with the FBI and how do we work that out. And I don't disagree with Mr. Sullivan that there may be other law enforcement agencies involved with this. But this is the key one. We need to get the FBI and the OIG, and then we will be in the support role we need to be in.
Do you both agree that if the FBI is not leading an investigation into employee misconduct, it is properly the role of the IG and not the role of the EPA Office of Homeland Security to lead that investigation?
I agree 100%.
What about you?
Yes, sir, but again, the devil's in the details. If there's misconduct, we should be told on the front end, not the back end.
Okay. I've run out of time, but we've got to resolve this, gentlemen. We got to find a way to get this done, because as I said in my opening statement, legislatively, I don't see it happening. I'd like to think it would happen, but I doubt it. And so I'm hoping that all the agencies. So, Mr. Sullivan, are you saying that more than the FBI has to be brought into the discussion to get these issues resolved?
Well,
or else we'll be back here next 6 months going through the same thing.
Mr. Cummings, I'm saying that OHS has to recognize that they must share information with us if it's from the Secret Service or the U.S. Capitol Police or the U.S. Marshal Service. Right now, they are sharing nothing with us.
Yeah, I got you. Mr. P., and then I'm finished. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On the threat issue that Patrick brought up, Mr. Sullivan brought up earlier, it is my understanding, and of course, Mr. Sullivan, I'm happy to dig into it deeper, but when that threat issue came up from another intelligence agency that was not properly and quickly reported to the Inspector General, I was under the understanding that our Deputy Chief of Staff and your office have worked out procedures last fall to rectify that problem. But if that is not the case, you haven't told me that yet. So I'm happy to do more.
So, you know, it's a damn shame that we had to come to a hearing for you all to communicate.
Well, Mr. Cummings, I can state here under oath, I've received zero information from the Office of Homeland Security concerning any threat at any time, and none of my agents have ever received any information from the Office of Homeland Security concerning any threat at any time.
We can do better, Mr. P. We can do better. Would you agree?
Yes, but I thought we had procedures in place. I'll have to go back and.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman.
If I could have the Chairman or the Ranking Member's indulgence for just a follow-up. I want to understand, this office is an office, I understand, that essentially is simply an administrative part of the administrator's headquarters. Is that right? I want to understand what, because we keep talking about it. I was told this is about 10 people, and it exists inside Gina McCarthy's suites, if you will, there. Is that correct? I just want to understand, when we talk about it like it's some agency somewhere that does certain things, this is 10 people who work for the administrator and have this tasking that I guess almost goes to sources and methods kind of thing. Is that right?
Yes. The office was created by Christy Whitman after 9/11, when President Bush issued a number of Homeland Security presidential directives when that whole system was being set up. EPA has some roles under those. We're not a major player, and I think everybody will realize that, but we're not an absent player. We're involved with chemical decontamination. We're involved with confidential business information that may have some security risks in the hazardous chemical world, and a number of other responsibilities and critical drinking water infrastructure. EPA, for instance, was intimately involved with decontaminating the Hart office building, from anthrax. That we were one of the lead agencies on that. So we have
Don't forget about Longworth. We won't.
So I just
both sides of the Capitol were contaminated.
I'm sorry. All of that. So so my only contextual comment here for the benefit of the committee is that there's a context to the creation of this coordinating office in the Office of the Administrator to coordinate these activities across the agency.
No, and I didn't want to take excessive time. I just want people to understand, Christine Todd Whitman creates essentially 10 assistants to her that operate in her offices, and it has a title and it goes on, but it's not a statutory creation of Congress per se that is mandated. It could go away today. Is that correct?
Well, we would have to have alternative ways to coordinate and make sure our functions and responsibilities.
Right, but you could assign it to the IG effectively if you wanted to.
No, I don't think we can assign programmatic activities to the IG.
Okay,
I think that wouldn't work.
But there are remedies. It's it's like our staff.
There are remedies to the issues we're talking about, but we couldn't assign, I think, all the functions of that to the IG, and I think they would agree.
But employee misconduct, they certainly could do. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mica.
Well, I think you've confirmed for the people that I represent that there's a three-ring circus going on in EPA, and it's quite embarrassing. I hope not too many people are, who are on depressant medications are watching the hearing, because this could get you awfully depressed. You've got people who don't work and get paid for it. You've got people who have broken laws and stay on the payroll and get paid. How much, who knows, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Williams, somebody, how much does a GS-14 employee make? Isn't that fairly high? Mr. Williams, what's the range?
I believe it's around $120,000, $125,000.
$125,000.
I believe that's the range.
That's the unnamed GS-14 employee who's sitting there for, it says 2010. When did we discover that he's, when did we discover he's looking at the porno?
I believe the information came to us within the last 6 months. The last 6 months, and we gained we acquired that information.
So this guy's making $120,000, spending 2 to 6 hours a day looking at porno. Then this information I have is he received performance awards during the time period?
He possibly did, yes, sir.
Well, he did or he didn't.
I'm not sure. I'd have to review
There's a guy back there with a tie on, stripes, and he's nodding his head yes.
I can answer that, Mr. Mica. Yes, he did receive performance awards.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And Mr. Cummings, I mean, we talked about some of this stuff. Then you've got, I had no idea you had 10 people in an Office of Homeland Security. You've got EPA leadership obstructing the Inspector General and some of their activities, it sounds like it's completely out of control. We set up, and we really need to sit down and talk in a bipartisan manner about getting civil service under control. I chaired it for 4 years. To date, I haven't seen, I can probably count all the people on 2 hands I've seen fired, but something needs to be changed. When people are breaking the law, when you have this GSA 14 sitting there abusing his position, his salary, ripping off the taxpayers. Somebody told me he's still on the payroll. Is he on the payroll, Mr.
Yes,
Wayne?
he is.
This is so offensive. It's unbelievable. But we need some way to fire these folks, and your hands are tied right now, Mr. Williams. You know, we set up civil service to protect them against, you know, political intervention or improper dealing with federal employees, try to give them some job security, not make it a political circus. But they've made it a merry-go-round for ripping off the taxpayers, and we can't get rid of them. Is that right?
Yes, sir. To take administrative action is the responsibility of the agency solely. The IG can just gather the facts and then provide that information to the agency.
In this Office of Homeland Security, within the agency, how many other agencies, does anyone know, have a similar setup?
Sir, most cabinet-level agencies have similar, they're not called the same Office of Homeland Security, but there's something similar that does an intelligence function.
I can't say they don't belong in every one, but it seems like from a standpoint of better operations, some of these things could be handled within the existing structure, and some can be investigated from your standpoint, right, Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, sir.
At far less cost, less bureaucracy, and less turmoil. And I mean, look at the non-disclosure agreements and this whole three-ring circus we've had here described today of agencies trying to function and in countervention of themselves. Did you tell us, too, that they have never found an instance in which there was some security issue?
What I said, Mr. Micah, was that the Office of Homeland Security, I've been the Assistant Inspector General for 3 years. They have never given us one piece of information concerning a threat. At no time ever did they do that. And Mr. Perciasepe is correct. I did meet with his Deputy Chief of Staff, and I was told they're going to try to work out the threat information part, but it never happened.
And I'll bet you most of the folks that work, those 10 people, are all in the GS-14 range, making more than $100,000. I'd probably be right.
The gentleman's time has expired, but you can answer if you know their ratings.
I do not know. I know that there were 2 SESers. There was some GS-15, some GS-14s, and some lower-ranked people.
And SESers, senior executive service, would be over $200,000.
They're way up there.
Thank you. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note that our military observers left, so apparently they weren't too impressed with the oversight nature that's going on here. But let me try to distill this, because I think it's a little bit confusing. Mr. Perciasepe, we had apparently during President Bush's term after 9/11, Christy Todd Whitman, the then administrator, set up a small division of 10 people within the EPA to sort of get analysis and intelligence and things of that nature, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And also,
and Administrator McCarthy sort of inherited this.
that is correct.
All right.
And as did Administrator Jackson.
All the way through.
Right.
And what seems to be a problem here is that within the Section 811 of the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 1995, there's a question as to when things, disputes that involve whether or not someone is disclosing classified information has to be referred to the FBI or other agencies, and what is EPA's obligation to include the Office of Inspector General in that process, right?
That's correct.
All right, so that's what the minority staff is trying to work with you and Mr. Sullivan and others to get resolved. I, for the life of me, don't understand the title of this hearing on that basis. Mr. Williams, your testimony briefed us on 4 different misconduct cases, right, that involved time and attendance issues.
Yes, sir.
Right. The majority of the allegations of fraud that your office receives, do they lead to significant amounts of fraud in cases like that?
And time and attendance, sir?
Yes.
Well, really, we don't know what we don't know. I mean,
All right, so the 4 is what you're dealing with.
Well, there are many. We have about 80 employee integrity cases right now nationwide.
But in the EPA?
Yes, within
Okay.
EPA, yes.
So that's a common problem, and it has internal controls that need to be addressed?
Well, yes.
Have you made recommendations with regard to that?
Well, as far as the Office of Investigation, sir, we just gather the facts and then we do a report and provide that to the agency. We don't make recommendations as far as investigations.
So you don't give them any idea what internal controls would improve their situation? You leave that up to them?
Not the Office of Investigations, the Office of Audit may.
Okay. Mr. Perciasepe, have you done anything as an EPA with respect to the fact findings that have been shared with you from the Inspector General's office on those time and attendance issues?
We've initiated our audit own as well, or review, and we've provided that information to the Inspector General. But on the individual cases that they have concluded, within the last month, several of them have been concluded. They have provided that information to us, and the supervisors that are involved are now reviewing it to take the proper administrative actions. I want to say that since 2009, we've working with the IG and in part on some of their findings. There have been 71 criminal actions that have been taken, 111 civil actions that have been taken, and 240 administrative actions. So the idea that we don't do anything with these things, but
So when they're investigated and when there's a finding on that, you take action?
We need to get the findings of the investigation to be able to proceed with the administrative procedures if it's going to be proceeding administratively.
And that's what they're doing at the Office of the Inspector General?
They are doing it.
And they're doing a good job?
Yes.
And they're giving you the information?
When they're done.
And you're taking action on it? Since 2009, you have all those numbers that show the data that show that you're taking action on it. That's the way it should work, right?
Exactly the way it works. I believe personally, again, as Patrick said under oath, that we have a very good relationship with the IG on these matters.
When you look at all of those, have you changed some of your processes and controls to deal with this issue writ large? Or are you still dealing with a case-by-case situation?
Well, the case-by-case and our own sort of, what we did in our support for the work that they're doing is we used a survey technique to look across the agency, not based on a complaint. We went and did a survey and found, similar patterns in some areas.
And you addressed those?
Yeah, well, what we're doing is, where they appropriately needed some action, but what we're doing is this is informing our systemic changes, which I reported on a little bit in our hearing in October. Right. Changing our HR system, changing our computer triggers.
As you should. I mean, let's face the damage that the cases Mr. Williams talks about to put a black mark in the entire agency. When that kind of conduct goes on and people still have their job after, looking at sites and things of that nature, I mean, I think we all understand it does damage to all the people in the agency that are working hard and trying to get the job done and doing a relatively good job on that basis. But I want to clarify for the record, Mr. Williams, outside of issues dealing with that 10-person subsection of EPA, what they call the Office of Homeland Security, these fraud and time and attendance issues, has there been any EPA obstruction on your going after those matters?
No, sir.
So all those cases that you're dealing with, the 4 you reported or whatever, you're getting cooperation from the Environmental Protection Agency?
Well, we're conducting our investigations, and then we relay the information to the agency.
Right. But they're not impeding you in your investigation?
No, they're not impeding our investigations.
So the whole dispute here, despite the title of this hearing, I think is totally misleading, deals with the Office of Homeland Security, when EPA reports things to that office, when the FBI or other agencies get involved. That's pretty much the context of the dispute. Is that right, Mr. Perciasepe?
I would say that is a major part of it.
Okay. All right. I have no further questions. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I'm going to have a copy of some of the sites that the gentleman visited given to you for your use in camera to make sure you have it. I am not going to place it in the record. It would seem to be counterproductive to have any advertising come out of this hearing that could lead to others in or out of the government going to those sites.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. The normal course of affairs on these matters is once it's in the IG's hand, we do wait for their investigation to be completed before, because they may decide, for reasons we've already talked about, to pursue it in a criminal manner. And so, thank you. You know, before we, so that parses out, and as soon as we get their report and whichever direction they feel it needs to go in, we will follow it.
No, and I appreciate that. I guess they said, you know, you're not obstructing their investigation, but it is within the administrator and your purview and the deputy's purview to immediately put somebody on administrative leave, take them away from computers, take away their passes, if the prima facie, if you will, is, yeah, they were doing it. And that authority, we actually, quite frankly, and I know the gentleman from Massachusetts would join me, we often criticize long periods of full pay of people who have done wrong, but long periods of remaining on the job for somebody who clearly has done something wrong is perhaps between the two the greater of the two. And I think that's part of the reason that in addition to the obstruction that we believe, the stand down and some of these other activities that we're concerned about because of a small sub-agency, that we're also looking at the question of what is the result when something egregious has happened, such as the assault on Ms. Heller. The question is, why is that person not relieved, particularly if they continue to assault or to create a hostile environment? Zero tolerance is what is often called, and a zero tolerance for workplace violence, abuse, and creating a hostile environment is pretty much something that has become widely accepted, not just in government, but in the private sector. And your authority, and I think the gentleman would agree.
Can I yield for a sec?
Of course.
Okay. So look, I hear what you're saying, and I just look at this title, is the EPA leadership obstructing its own Inspector General? Is a total separate matter. I think we all agree now that they've not been obstructing the Office of Inspector General.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, in a second, please. All right, that the matter is different as to how quickly they react on a disciplinary basis. We can all talk about that. Ought to be faster, it ought to be no tolerance on that basis, but it's not an indication that they're obstructing the Office of Inspector General's work on that. And I want to know, is it a contention of the Chairman or the majority that, in fact, they have been obstructing this particular investigation?
I think I will do the best thing in this case and say, Mr. Sullivan, in some cases, do you feel you've been obstructed, denied information, or in some way unable to do your job?
Well, I think that's other than the Office of Homeland Security.
Well, wait a second. Well, but the whole point is the Office of Homeland Security, another unauthorized person with a gun, the assault that came during that investigation, that's the main feature that caused the title. But we're not going to have a hearing in which we bring these people in and ignore a pervasive failure to discipline and to take immediate action for such things.
Then the title should be, is the EPA disciplining its people quickly enough in the proper way?
Will the Chairman yield?
You know, I can't get 4,000 letters for a headline. It just doesn't work that way. The fact is that the obstruction of the IG, the failure of the IG to do their job and be fully informed is the primary reason. And these individuals are both from investigations. Yes, this committee is deeply disappointed that when someone has done wrong, they stay on the job. When someone has falsified documents for 20 years as to somebody working when they're not, they're still on the job. Those management considerations are here because the information was provided.
That would be a shared concern, Mr. Chairman, on that. But it's not obstructing the Office of Inspector General's job.
Will the Chairman yield?
It's just failing to do the disciplinary process in a way that we might all agree ought to be expedited.
Thank you. It is my, yes, the Chairman would yield.
On this topic, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent and enter into a record from Administrator Gina McCarthy a letter on her letterhead, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, dated October 28, 2013. It's to the Inspector General, Mr. Arthur Elkins. In it, for instance, she says, therefore, I request that the OIG temporarily halt its review until the process I have described is complete. That is halting and stopping, and I believe it obstructing their ability to do their job.
I assume the gentleman has been here for the entire hearing.
Without objection,
the document
will be placed in the record.
Okay. No, just say, you were here for the hearing, so I assume you heard it, and you're not being disingenuous, maybe just not reading
I heard
right.
every word of it. I've sat here the
She
entire
made a
time.
request, which is not an obstruction, and the office
The
agreed to
direct-
that request
The administrator of
voluntarily.
the administrator of the EPA is saying to temporarily halt its investigation.
And they did.
True or not? True or not?
And they did.
And I think that's wrong. That's why we're having a hearing. That's why Congress is involved.
Well, certainly the gentleman does see obstruction. If he doesn't, then that's a good reason for the title to be the part that we spend a lot of debate on. But I thank the gentleman for not debating that somebody surfing pornography sites, people falsifying documents, that these should lead to terminations, not to bonuses and promotions.
There would be
And
no
with
dispute
that,
that it should lead to
and with that,
immediate
it's my
action.
pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Utah.
Prior to that,
for his-
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask to be able to
Without objection, to be placed in the record.
placed in the record. And the second thing I would say is, I think it's equally as wrong that the Inspector General agreed to that. They should never agree to halt an investigation. I don't care who asks them. I think that's equally as wrong. But don't deny that the Administrator asked them in writing to halt their investigation. Halting an investigation you don't think is obstruction? You and I totally disagree.
I'm shocked that that could happen in this committee. Mr. Chaffetz, I look forward to your round of questioning. You're recognized.
Thank you. Appreciate you all being here. Special Agent Heller, Drake, I appreciate your service and your sharing your personal story. After the incident, my understanding is that the Federal Protective Service investigated. Is that correct? Can you walk us through that real briefly, please?
Yes, sir. The Federal Protection Service investigated the assault, and they, like I said in my testimony, they interviewed me and they interviewed Agent Dorman and then another individual from the Office of Homeland Security.
And did they come to any conclusions?
They felt that there was probable cause for an arrest warrant, which is, I'm going to assume they felt there was probable cause. That's why they took that affidavit to the magistrate.
And then what happened?
The magistrate sent it back to the, my understanding is the magistrate sent it back to the agency for administrative action.
What did you think of that personally?
Well, I was disappointed, certainly, but I do understand that the U.S. Attorney's Office is often busy and they have priorities.
Did they give you any excuses as to why they chose not to pursue this?
No, I don't know.
Did they ever talk to you about it?
No.
So they didn't talk to you, they didn't explain, they just referred it back. And now where does it stand?
I don't know where it stands right now. As far as I know, there's been no action taken against Mr. Williams. I've just learned there's been basically counter allegations made, I guess. I'm not 100% sure.
Mr. Persisepi, I hope I pronounced that properly. I'm trying, that's for sure.
You're the first one to get it right. Congratulations.
Thank you. You said that without exception, do you think this is an exception or not?
I think Administrator McCarthy, in that letter that you're pointing out, had first and foremost in her mind the safety of the employees. There are complaints of hostile work environment on the employees placed to us by the employees of the Office of Homeland Security. There's clearly the incident and the feelings and the distress that Special Agent Heller is expressing here, which is real and needs to be dealt with.
So the investigation is halted.
The investigation of what to do with that employee that has an 1811 employee, that investigation is halted.
You said without exception. They're moving forward without exception. That sounds like an exception.
It was by mutual agreement. It was by mutual agreement. If the IG wants to change their mind about that,
Mr. Sullivan, what do you say about that?
My boss, the Inspector General, Mr. Elkins, did agree to temporarily halt the investigation. But I knew we did that in the caveat that there would be immediate ongoing negotiations and discussions to resolve the situation.
Were there?
There was an attempt to, but it broke down fairly quickly afterwards.
So are you doing the investigation or not?
No, not right now, we're not.
I
However-
know you're not
however,
Mr.
sir-
Elkins, but I don't understand that.
No, however, the allegation about Ms. Heller being assaulted and the subsequent counter-allegations made by Mr. Williams against agents in my office, that whole parcel of allegations has been referred to the Department of Defense Inspector General, and they are conducting an investigation looking into the original allegations by Ms. Heller and my agents, and then the counter-allegations being made by Mr. Williams and other members of OHS.
Guys, take some action. Grab this thing and make it happen. You shouldn't take an act of Congress to have to get you to all do your jobs. I'm sorry, but you have a professional agent doing her job, it gets a criminal, and then nothing happens. This guy looking at porn, how long has that been going on since?
You all, again, have more
Is the answer 2010?
I do not know. I do not know.
How can I know and you don't?
Because the Inspector General has not told me.
How many direct reports do you have? How many people directly report to you?
Maybe 5, I don't know.
Maybe 5. You don't know? Is it 4, 5, 6? What about human resources? Who does human resources report to? Do they report to you?
They report to the administrator.
And you're not in that?
The administrator and I are in the same box, so to speak. Okay. So direct reports, I thought you were talking about like my management assistant and people who, obviously I'm the deputy.
Does human resources or whatever the name is over there, did they not share this information with you? If you're in the same box as Gina McCarthy, are you telling me that she didn't know about it either?
The first time I learned about it was a meeting with the Inspector General.
You don't think that's wrong?
When?
This is a big deal. Yeah, when was that?
Within the last several months. And they're in.
And he still said, is it against the rules? Is it against the department policies to watch porn at your office?
It is.
Then fire him. Fire him. What's the question?
Need to wait.
For what?
For the Inspector General's report. I don't know if they're going to send him a criminal notice, so.
Is there any doubt in your mind that this guy is watching porn on a regular basis in his office? Is there any question?
I have no reason to doubt it because I trust the IG.
So what are you doing about it?
Well,
I'd like him to answer that question. What is he doing about it?
I mean,
I am not personally doing anything about it.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Ding, 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 ding.
okay.
Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Kelly, we're going to go to you. I just want one thing for the record is when the IG comes to you with anything, including this gentleman surfing these inappropriate sites, you have the ability to follow up, ask for additional questions. So the fact that you don't know more is not because he would withhold it. You have the right to ask more.
I didn't mean to insinuate that.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I did. But obviously.
You have a lot of things going on. You have a large organization. I understand that. I just want to make it clear that you could know more. We don't have some information that you couldn't have. It's just a question of asking.
I'm pretty certain that that's correct. Yes, sir.
I thank you. Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that the EPA's Office of Homeland Security entered into a memorandum of understanding with the FBI to spell out how the agency and the Bureau would cooperate in instances where classified information may have been disclosed to a foreign power. That is what we mean by Section 811 referrals, and 811 refers to a statute. Mr. P., is that your view of what the MOU does?
The MOU is basically sets out the parameters of cooperation with the FBI on national security matters, including assistance we would provide to the FBI.
Okay. Mr. Sullivan, one of your concerns about the MOU is that it touches upon the Office of Inspector General's oversight and investigation responsibilities regarding employee misconduct. Is that right?
Yes, Ms. Kelly, the problem, the basic problem with the MOU is that the responsibilities and the authority of the IG is silent. It's not mentioned. And our contention is, in order to have a national security investigation targeting an EPA employee, he or she must be engaged in some kind of serious misconduct. And our position is, and always has been, as soon as OHS or any other EPA employee knows about an allegation of serious misconduct, they must immediately report it to the IG. After that notification is made to us, we will work very closely with OHS and the FBI or any other entity. The problem is right now, OHS is using that as an excuse to not tell us about misconduct.
I know our ranking member Cummings has been working intensively with both the IG and the EPA, and there's a lot of common ground. You both agree that the roles need to be clarified, and you agree in large part on those roles, and you agree that information should be shared. You also agree that the FBI needs to be part of the discussion. Do you both agree that the high-level meeting taking place next week with top leadership at the Office of Inspector General, the EPA, and the FBI is the right venue for working out these issues? Both of you can answer.
I think we need to break the logjam. If indeed there is a logjam that has occurred since October, we need to break the logjam. So bringing the Director of National Intelligence from the FBI, the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, and the IG together, I'm not going to guess that they're going to come up with every answer in that meeting, but if they can frame out how we want to move forward on these issues we're talking about, I think it will be short order after that everyone else can work out the details. So I think Administrator McCarthy bringing the FBI and the OIG leadership together is an important step. And obviously, whatever level we had been working at, it needed to be bumped up.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes. I concur with what Mr. Perciasepi said. However, the 811 part of that memorandum with the FBI is a small subset. OHS uses that memorandum to expand it way beyond 811 referrals. The other issue is we can't be put in a position where someone else is negotiating away the OIG's authorities, nor could we legally negotiate away our own authorities. We have to be involved in misconduct investigations, period.
All right. Mr. P., shouldn't the OIG perspective and concerns be addressed at this meeting? Would you agree with that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Shouldn't the OIG's perspective and concerns be addressed at this meeting?
The IG is the lead and the responsible authority for employee misconduct at EPA. I'm going to guess that there'll be some sequencing on how things are done once we have a better framework. But they are the ones that are responsible for misconduct. The confusion comes in is that misconduct happening in the commission of a national security breach of some kind? And is there, and I want to make it clear, the Office of Homeland Security does not have the authority to issue any do not disclose orders. Those come from the FBI. But the key here is how to sequence the proper investigations when there may be both an employee misconduct investigation and a national security investigation that is obviously being enabled by the misconduct itself. So those things need to be coordinated. You know, I'm not an expert in law enforcement deconflicting, but this happens every day in one way or another, and I have high confidence, Mr. Chairman, that we'll be able to do this if we can get the right people together.
I hope you're correct. I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And might I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that maybe a headline for this hearing ought to be something like "The Atmospheric Environment of the EPA is Polluted." Mr. Sullivan, following that train of thought, it appears that there are other examples of EPA obstruction of your office. Beth Craig lied to the OIG. Is that true or not?
Yes, that's correct.
She's a deputy administrator at OAR and EPA.
She was. She's been reassigned to another position now.
Another position. Region 9 Administrator Jared Blumenfeld lied about personal email use. Is that correct?
Sir, I have no knowledge of that. I do not know if he lied. Mr. Blumenfeld was never interviewed by my office or my agents concerning an email. That might have been our auditors, but I have absolutely no knowledge of that.
It was the Office of Audit, I'm just told. Nancy Dunham refused to be interviewed. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again, that was a request by our Office of Audit, and they did personally discuss that with me.
Well, I think we need to point those few examples out that we continue to have to deal with. And one thing about history, if we don't learn from it, we're bound to repeat it. And so I want to go back to the secret agent man from the CIA, EPA, whatever he determined himself to be, and Mr. Persiasepi. How did the EPA Office of Homeland Security become involved in the John Beale matter? Again, we're going back in history, lengthy history, to see if we've learned for the present or if there's some similar things that are taking place right now.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that nobody's been claiming they're working at the CIA at EPA right now. So that part of the history I hope we'll never have to live again.
Yeah, but they're working at other places without working.
You know, I like to say here hindsight is always 20/20, but I like your approach better, that what are we learning, how are we getting over it?
Right.
When the John Beale matter, I mean, again, as you pointed out, it was going on for a good decade before that with many other people involved. But when that first started to come up, you know, like this can't be right kind of come up, the first instinct people had was to find out if this person really did work for the FBI. I'm sorry, the CIA. And so I think there's where we got tangled up. I'm using hindsight and what lessons have been learned.
And this was the EPA Office of Homeland Security interviewing Mr. Beale.
Well, it was originally the Office of, you know, the Personnel Office, the HR Office. You know, is there any record of this? They asked the senior intelligence officer, the agency involved with the unit in the agency that communicates with the intelligence community, whether they had any information, and that went on for a couple of months.
How many interviews did OHS conduct of John Beale?
I do not know the answer to that. But so then I think once they figured out there's no record anywhere of this, that's when it was turned over by the General Counsel and Homeland Security to the IG. That's my recollection. Now, if I had to live that through again, saying lesson learned, I would have given it to the IG right away.
Right away. But
or at least let them know we were looking into this.
What you're saying is that the EPA Office of Homeland Security interviewed John Beale before the OIG.
I don't know what they did. All I know is that they tried to find out if he worked for the CIA. Again, I testified in October that I can see the logic that this would be a human resources thing. Is there any record of this? They went to the liaison with the intelligence community saying, do you have any record of this? That went on.
Mr. Sullivan, did you have first crack at interviewing Mr. Beale, or did EPA Office of Homeland Security have first crack at it?
The Office of Homeland Security interviewed Mr. Beale at least 3 times before we even knew about the case.
How did that impact your investigation?
Well, it severely impacted us because Mr. Beale then was alerted that his fraud had been discovered before the proper authorities, being the IG, Office of Investigations, had been alerted. And he was able to backtrack, potentially destroy records, potentially build an alibi. And then when we first approached him, he was expecting an interview, and he referred us to his attorney.
So it harmed your inspection process, the process you are defined to do, capable of doing, authorized to do. It
yes,
hindered.
sir. It clearly harmed our investigation. It delayed it and harmed it. Now, had OHS simply done, as Mr. Perciasepe suggests, a records check with the CIA, we'd been perfectly fine with that. That's part of their analytical job. Their job is not to interview employees. That's our job.
That's your job.
Yes, not my job.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask one more question in deference to all the time I've had to sit here and wait for others went way overboard. Let me ask this question, Mr. Sullivan. Is the handling of the employees in question today that we're talking about, that Ms. Heller had to suffer through and all of the rest, is it significantly different process that's going on now compared to Mr. Beal's, relative to your responsibility, your authority?
Mr. Walberg, I could tell you, as of right now, I have zero visibility on what OHS is doing. I have no idea what they're doing. I have no idea what cases they're working on. I have no idea what employees they're interviewing. That's the problem.
The atmosphere environment around the EPA is polluted, and it's affecting your impact. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. P., let me come to you. We've heard about pornographic sites being looked at. We've heard about people being paid without showing up for work. We've heard about CIA agents. We continue to hear stories. Would you not say that the EPA has a management problem, a systemic failure in management?
EPA has 16,000 employees.
That's not the question. I understand that. Do you have a management problem, a systemic problem within management to allow these kind of things to go on?
No.
Okay. I'm troubled by that because as we continue to hear these things unfold and unfold, let me turn your attention to Region 4, of which it covers my district of North Carolina. In 1990, the EPA came in and conducted a test on one of my constituents' piece of property without her permission and took samples and found that there was toxic hazardous substance on her property. Do you think it would have been proper to go on to her piece of property without her permission? Yes or no? Is it proper to go on to somebody's property without their permission?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, let me go on further. Do you think it was proper when they found that they did not tell her for over 9 years that there was toxic stuff on her property? Yes or no? Would you want to be informed if you had toxic stuff that was found on your property? Would you want to be informed by the EPA that it was there?
Yes.
Okay. So do you not think that that would be a good thing to do?
I really have no idea what the circumstances you're talking about. I want to be responsive here.
All right. Well, let me
I don't know whether it was under some court order. I have no idea. But,
okay,
but I'm happy to drill deep into
Okay. Well, let me tell you, you've been drilling deep because the IG has been involved, and this is a contaminated site, a Superfund site, of which it's been there for 25 years, and yet we've not even started to clean it up. Do you think that that is a problem?
That's a budget problem.
Oh, that's a budget problem. So we have a tremendous budget, and so we have known toxic water with contamination in water, and we have a budget problem, but we're spending billions of dollars on other things, but we can't clean up a site in Asheville, North Carolina.
EPA's Superfund budget has been cut.
All right.
Through the years.
So let me go on a little bit further. Here's a report that you should have had. This was a call center who received a call from a constituent in my district in September of 2009. In April, it was a hotline, and they said that there was contamination. Do you know when that phone call was returned? Never. Do you know when the voicemail was checked? September of that year, 5 months. Now, this is a hotline. Do you not see that as a problem?
Yes.
Okay, you see that as a problem. So let me, in the time remaining, go on a little bit closer because this is Region 4, this is water quality. We have a Superfund site that's not being cleaned up, and yet what we decided to do, and I say we because it's the government, I certainly wouldn't have decided to do this. It appears that we gave a $63,000 bonus to the water quality guy in 2013 for a job well done. Are you aware of that? $62,985 to be exact. This is on top of his $179,000 salary. Do you think that this is part of a job well done?
Well, I don't think Superfund is part of the Water Division's work, but I don't.
But he's managing, and it's water quality. I've been involved with it. I know it extremely well. Do you think he deserved a $63,000 bonus? What do I tell the single moms back in Asheville, North Carolina, when a federal government employee is getting a $63,000 bonus?
I have no idea whether that person had any involvement with this project at all. So you're asking me questions.
So you justify a $63,000 bonus on any, so he's making $240,000. You think that's a?
I don't even know what the bonus was for, sir. So it's very difficult for me to be able to be responsive to you here.
Okay. When do we start to change the management process within the EPA to allow the American taxpayers to trust that somebody's going to get fired when these things go on? How many people have been fired so far based on the actions that we've heard about today?
You know,
how many have been terminated?
Can I answer?
Sure.
Okay. Employees have rights, and all of the things that have been talked about today are in an administrative or IG investigation process. Taking final actions on employees' termination, suspension, or docking of pay, or whatever is available to be done, can't be done without those processes. And more importantly, and I want to be clear about this, me saying what I think should happen here today while those are still going on will prejudice those reviews.
Okay.
So I'm not going to do it.
That's an explanation. That's not an answer. How many have been terminated?
None.
That's what I was afraid. I'll yield back.
Mr. Persisapi, could you provide to the committee how many people have been fired in the last, say, 5 years? Is that fair? I'm not asking for names and titles.
I will provide all of our, up to firing, all of our disciplinary actions in the last 5 years. I will do that.
And you'll provide that to this committee?
Yes, I will.
Very good. Thank you. I will now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cardenas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sullivan, you say that it's important for EPA's Office of Homeland Security to share with the IG any information it may come across concerning potential criminal misconduct of an EPA employee. This information is not only necessary because you believe that the OIG has jurisdiction to investigate these cases, but also because, as a practical matter, your office needs the information for deconfliction purposes. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you explain to us what you mean by deconfliction and why it's so important?
Yes, sir. There's a basic tenet in law enforcement that you don't want to step on another agency's case, but most importantly, you don't want to put your agents or the officers of another agency at risk. It's critically important in drug investigations or counterfeiting investigations where we have an undercover officer. But it's also equally important in instances where you have a target where two agencies may be targeting the same individual for alleged criminal activity. It does not bode well when the agencies aren't talking with each other. Nothing good happens from that, and a lot of bad things can happen.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Mr. Perchesapi, I find Mr. Sullivan's argument for information sharing relevant. Do you agree that the IG should be informed whenever there's a national security investigation involving an EPA employee?
I'm getting better at this. I think we did talk about this a little bit earlier, and we're having a meeting on Friday next week with the head of counterintelligence of the FBI and the Inspector General, and the administrators bringing them together to see if we can come up with how we deal with that, because you've zeroed in on, I think, there are many issues being discussed here, but we zeroed in on one key one that I feel is workable and we can figure out what the proper sequences are, and that is when the misconduct is occurring in the conduct of a national security issue, and how that goes about. I believe, as I think you're alluding to, that law enforcement agencies do this kind of deconflicting all the time, and we just need to get the proper protocols and standard operating procedures in place to make sure that they happen appropriately.
Is one of the things that is on the minds or concern of the respective departments when it comes to investigations, is one of the concerns that if you don't follow appropriate protocols, that actually there could be a lawsuit on behalf of an employee, and unfortunately their chances of winning might be increased because you weren't being careful enough?
Yeah, I would argue there are probably many complications. Those could be some of them that have to be carefully weighed when there's overlapping jurisdiction that needs to be worked out.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that if one of you could clarify for us, when a person is a government employee, do they inherently give up their rights that we have as American citizens?
No, and everyone has their constitutional rights if you're accused of a crime. However, as a government employee, if any Inspector General wants to question you in your role as a government employee, there's a warning that we issue called a Kalkine's warning, which in effect tells the person being interviewed that you cannot be prosecuted for the statement you're going to give us. Nothing you say can be used against you unless you lie to us. You're compelled to speak to us, and if you don't speak to us, you'll be subject to disciplinary action up to and including removal. And that is across the board in the entire Federal Government whenever the IG approaches someone, as long as you're not under criminal investigation or criminal exposure.
So in other words, there is the allowance within the relationship between Federal employees and management / and/or investigative authorities at the Federal level to get down to the bottom of improving what's going on within agencies, and they do have access to those employees. Yet at the same time, it sounds like those employees can't be treated with impunity on how those investigations or how that questioning takes place.
Yes, but the issuing of the Kalkine's warning is within the purview of the Inspector General's office. It would not be appropriate for other entities within an agency to issue that warning. That's reserved for IG business to collect the facts, to ensure that we have relevant information and people are truthful to us.
Mm-hmm. So basically, unfortunately, for some people who think that it's simplistic, it isn't simplistic. It is a bit complicated.
It certainly is complicated, sir. Yeah, but they're all workable problems, but it's complicated.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, I attended a field hearing in my district in Michigan that dealt with how Federal regulations are impeding the growth of small businesses and manufacturers. One common theme throughout the hearing related to regulations being imposed by the EPA which do not solve any relevant problems and will cost these businesses billions of dollars to comply. I am not discounting the EPA. Throughout history, when serious problems have arisen, we have put in place appropriate and effective regulations that protect Americans. The impact of regulations can be good. However, I am back here today attending another hearing regarding the EPA only to discover that the EPA is involving themselves in areas that they should not be involved in. Things are occurring at the EPA which cause me great concern about the leadership and how work is being conducted or maybe not conducted. Maybe the EPA has too much time on their hands or too many employees working for the agency because instead of concentrating on determining what regulations are needed and would be effective to safeguard Americans and not cost businesses billions of dollars, thus regulating America out of business, the agency is involved in questionable activities. In an article published in September 2013, prior to the government shutdown, the EPA announced that only 1,069 of its employees out of the 16,205 employed were essential. So basically, the EPA acknowledged that over 90% of their employees were not essential. I think maybe this confirms my point that the EPA might have too many employees and too much time in their hands, and that this has created an environment that encourages misconduct. With that being said, I have a few questions. Mr. Parisepi, did I get that right? Yep.
If you guys want to try, it's got an H in it. Pretend there's an A. Perch.
Purchaseppi.
Purchaseppi. There you go.
Purchaseppi. Thank you very much. That being said, you have 15,000 employees that you basically said were non-essential. Have you completed an audit to determine how many employees are essential to protect our environment during? Go ahead.
First of all, let me say the determination of an exempt and non-exempt employee during a cessation of appropriations is a very different thing than whether they're needed to implement the laws that Congress has enacted. It's whether or not they're needed to stay behind and run the risk of not being paid, depending on the outcome of Congress's resolution of the budget, because of a danger to the public's assets or an immediate damage that might occur.
You have John Beal, unnamed GS-14 EPA employee, viewing pornography at work for 2 to 6 hours a day. You have people working, well, holy cow, no, they're getting paid, not at work, don't even have a building pass, don't even have a computer hooked up to the EPA. You have Renee Page, who has received a prestigious Presidential Rank Award in 2012, which comes to the cash award of $35,000, who hired 17 family members and friends for paid intern positions, sold jewelry and weight loss products during her leisure time during work hours. Her daughter, who was an employee at the EPA, received a cash bonus from Mrs. Page's budget account, inappropriately influenced the contract. We'll hear more about that, I'm sure, later. Beth Craig, what's this? Mr. Beal's travel expenses, I think she approved. Another GS-15 employee getting paid while in a retirement home. Retention bonus abuses, one thing after another. But, you know, the other thing that I heard in my district from many people saying that the EPA is looking for a new mission. Because what I'm hearing complaints from is, you know, I'm from Michigan, and you can travel 7 miles in any direction and hit a body of water, thousands of lakes and rivers and streams. And we have a lot of those lakes have a small seasonal marina. They rent rowboats for fishermen to fish during the day for about $15, $20 a day. And the EPA is visiting them and causing havoc, and some of these people have told me they're going to have to shut down to meet those requirements. So once again, have you completed an audit to determine how many employees are essential to protect our environment? Because it appears, sir, that they have more time on their hands and are looking for a mission. Now, I want to be clear. I grew up in a time when we had Love Canal and rivers that caught on fire. EPA was the great champion. But you have 16,000 employees, it appears, looking for a new mission. Sir, have you conducted an audit, and if not, will you sometime in the future?
I really don't know what that audit would be, but we haven't done an audit. I'm just going to answer you straight up. We don't have an audit on trying to determine whether each employee is essential or not essential.
I strongly suggest you do that. Do you know, Mr. Purchaseppi, you said to my colleague, Mr. Meadows, that your employees have rights. I want to tell you, Mr. Purchaseppi, excuse me, I want you to know my constituents have rights too. And they take precedent over the rights of your employees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Purchaseppi, is there something you wanted to say in response?
Oh, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. No, getting back to the substance of the small marina operators, I'm happy to look into that if you want me to.
Thank you very much. I look forward to your visit, and we'll give you a tour of the many Michigan lakes and streams.
The gentleman's time has expired.
As long as I can do some muskie fishing, I'll be happy.
Very good.
You can come to Cleveland for walleye pike. And with all due respect, what came out of those boats that burned on the Cuyahoga has been greatly over-exaggerated. And you Michigan folks going after us Clevelanders, I got a problem with that a little bit, but we'll get into that at another time. With that, we go to Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Purchaseppi,
over here on the side where I appreciate your training us up on name pronunciation. I'm a big believer in training folks up. I've only been here 3 years. I can still be trained up, and I think that's true government-wide, right? My recollection of Mr. Beal's case is that he was discovered because of a change in EPA leadership, that folks who had not become accustomed to his ways began to ask questions, and that change led to better outcomes for us as a nation. I appreciate the work of the folks at OIG. I mean, it's a hard job, and whether you're a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, you have an IG there, and your IG's job is to train you up. And we don't have an IG on individual members' offices here. And if we did, and they came by my office, you know, I like to think I'm 100% the best fellow on Capitol Hill, but I'm convinced that if I brought in some folks, they could train me up. But it's hard to accept constructive criticism because you do want to do the best you can with what you have to work with. Tell me about the culture at EPA. Do you view the three folks sitting to your right as part of a team whose responsibility is to make you better every day, and a responsibility that you value, or is it a different relationship with the folks who sit to your right?
You know, as you just pointed out, there's always going to be some differences of opinions, and we've been talking today about a significant one that I think can be worked out. But on a general matter, I pointed out earlier that since 2009, since I came back in December of 2009, there's been about little over 2,600 different audits, reports, analysis done by the IG that we have cooperated on. We do 50 significant, I would call, audits a year, roughly. I think that's about right, Patrick and the rest of the gang here. And the vast majority of those are done in a way that we are learning every step of the way. We're learning in responding to the questions. We're learning in putting together the action plan. Not only that, we have a pretty open management structure at EPA. For instance, I chair a group called the Executive Management Council, which is made up of all the career deputies, including the career deputy of the Office of Inspector General. They are full participants in that discussion. We have an annual process under the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act, FMFIA, where the IG comes in and makes presentations to the entire senior leadership of the agency on where they see our weaknesses. We try very hard to have a culture that's open.
And I appreciate that, and that's exactly the question I was asking. I appreciate your answering it in that way, but I have to ask the folks from the Inspector General's office. This was a tale of a lot of collaboration and a lot of working together. But you know, the reports I've got in my folder this morning are things that I would hope would have never been written because we would have never had those problems, because we would have had a structure in place that those didn't occur to begin with. Is the structure that Mr. Perciasepe describes, Mr. Sullivan, of cooperation and collaboration, is he describing his own view, or is he describing the EPA culture, leadership culture?
In general, we have an excellent working relationship with the rest of the agency. However, it is extremely dysfunctional with the Office of Homeland Security, and that's why we have to resolve that.
And tell me about that, Mr. Perciasepe, because you spoke with great fondness about the collaboration that goes on there. Here we have a single office within a giant agency, a single office that we can agree has impeded the spirit of collaboration and cooperation that you provided. The tale that Ms. Heller had to tell about her encounter, we'd have had that person fired this afternoon. Now, we don't have the same workplace protections in Congress that you have at the EPA, but that would not be tolerated. Why does it require a congressional hearing to solve this issue when you have that collaborative relationship, and we're talking about one subdivision of dysfunction in an otherwise functioning agency?
It needs to be reconciled and worked through, and we've made attempts to do it, and we've now elevated it inside the agency, and Administrator McCarthy and Randall Coleman, who's the head of, works at the FBI, is the head of counterintelligence for the United States, and the Inspector General are going to get together next week, and they're going to try to put the framework together to deal with what kind of standard operation procedures or protocols we're going to need to have to deconflict or this issue, and the tensions and the confrontations that may occur are all derivative of these mission problems, I believe. But we're going to have to deal with individuals' behavior as we get the information on that.
You would agree with me then that, again, within this very collaborative process that you have described, cooperative process, there is no set of circumstances where this will persist. Not should persist, but will persist. We will, in fact, solve this because we can.
That's the intent, is to do that. And just listening to today, when I get back to the office, I'm going to direct the Office of Homeland Security to seek permission to share the information that Mr. Sullivan is talking about with them.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield to the Chairman.
Well, as long as you're going to do that,
Since this is permission from the FBI.
Well, but as long as you're going to do that, I would certainly hope that you would hear out what Mr. Sullivan said, and we knew from the previous investigation that the interference by an entity that had no business being in the middle of Mr. Beal's corrupt activity, a man who was the direct report to the administrator, worked for him or her for years. That interference, you know and I know and the American people know, reeked of her personal staff, these 10 people that work for her in an entity she created, or sorry, she continued but redirected. That interference in the investigation of Mr. Beal is exactly the kind of interference that makes it look like the IG is okay as long as they're doing stuff that she doesn't care about or that you don't care about. But quite frankly, I heard it here today and I saw it in the investigation. Mr. Beal should have been discovered a long time ago. The administrator herself deserves a lot of culpability, not just for the years that she didn't see it, but after she knew it, and it could have been stopped sooner, and it wasn't. I hope you're taking that back, because I know Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Williams, and I hope the Inspector General himself is concerned that that's part of the obstruction that has to end. And I'm sorry, but you can't have a management discussion about it. It never should have happened. There should have been zero tolerance. That type of interference with the IG is not about deconflicting. Do you understand that here today? If you have any disagreement, please say it now in front of us and the IG.
I can't remember everything you said, Mr. Chairman, but
your squad, this 10-man unit, interfered in the Beal investigation with the IG. That's already in our taillights, but it's exactly the kind of thing that has to be deconflicted.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, sir. I would just like to underscore, though, that the issue with the FBI is one part of the issue. The other issue is the Office of Homeland Security receiving allegations of misconduct and then independently vetting those allegations, conducting an investigation with or without the FBI without telling us. Our position is and always has been, as soon as OHS or another employee receives an allegation, they must immediately inform the IG.
Exactly. It is outside their purview. The moment they hear about it, it's no different, Mr. Perciasepe, than if you heard about it. Your job is to call the IG. Your job is not to send it to some entity created for a completely different purpose. That is what the ranking member, I know, has been trying to work on with his staff on a unilateral basis, and I respect that if he can get it done, that's great. This hearing is about the fact that it hasn't gotten done. Thank you, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is a second round now, so I'll go to Mr. Chaffetz and then the gentleman from California, Mr. Chaffetz.
I thank the Chairman. Mr. Perciasepe, Renee Page, are you familiar with Renee Page?
Yes, I am.
She is the, as I understand, the Director of the Office of Administration at the EPA, correct?
I don't know her exact.
At least that's what I have.
I don't.
But she's still employed at the EPA.
She's employed, but she's been removed from that responsibility during the conduct of the review of the report.
Do you know what she's doing right now?
I do not. She's not managing that program. We're in the process of reviewing the report we got from the IG a couple of weeks ago.
Can we, I don't know if it's Mr. Williams or Mr. Sullivan, can one of you please explain what it is you found about her?
Mr. Chaffetz, there was an issue. We have to be very careful here because of the Privacy Act. Ms. Page was not charged with a crime, and she has certain rights as an employee. So we did not publicly release her name, so we're very uncomfortable discussing her by name.
This is a person who earned a cash award of some $35,000. Now, that alone to me, I'm sorry, but as a Federal employee, unless you're personally helping to take out, as some people did, Osama bin Laden and others, you know, a $35,000 cash award, it seems obscene in my opinion. Given that this is still under review, I'm just deeply concerned about what is happening here. My understanding is that did the investigation, it was then referred to who? Who did you refer it to?
It was referred to EPA management.
How long is that? How long ago was that?
A couple of months.
About 2 months ago, I believe.
What's a reasonable amount of time? What's a reasonable amount of time so that you can come to the conclusion? I mean, 2 months?
Again, I'm in the similar situation here of what I can say and can't say. There are things going on that you can.
Fair enough. Would the gentleman suspend,
I'll just
please?
have to leave it.
Sure.
With your.
Stop the clock.
I really can't, Mr. President.
Okay. If the gentleman will suspend, I've stopped the clock. I've been advised by counsel, and I've previously been advised by counsel, that you are not in a forum in which that statute applies. Now, we will not ask you questions. Yes, the privacy of this woman by name is not a question that you can say, I can't answer in this forum. You're being asked before a hearing about an individual by name. Now, criminal referrals and the details that are beyond the scope of what the gentleman's questions are, I would ask him not to ask and you not to answer, because I think that could impede the criminal investigation. But the facts such as her activities, her sales, the bonus and so on, all of that is within the scope of this committee and is not covered by a law that was written not to apply to us and not to apply to our investigation. I want to make that clear in this forum because we go through this in depositions and transcribed interviews. Additionally, the fact that DOJ has declined to prosecute is not something that is going to be withheld. The American people have a right to know that allegations were made, they were sent to the Department of Justice, that's where we have our source of these allegations. They declined to prosecute. It's now back for an administrative decision. She may not have committed any crimes, but the elements that were sent there, which were fact-based, and the decline, and now that it's before administrative, all of those elements of her activities are fair and reasonable for the gentleman to ask and to expect a full and complete answer. So the gentleman will continue.
And let me just simply say, the allegations are very serious, and we've outlined a host of them. And Mr. Perciasepe, you make a point. It's a good point. It's a large agency with 16,000 employees, but what you've heard here over the course of the last several hours are very senior people. We're not talking about some newbie who's in the bowels of the administration somewhere. We're talking about senior management level people. Mr. Beal had a very senior level. This person I just referenced had a very senior position in the administration, and that's the concern. And there's this overarching feeling and concern that justice doesn't ever play out. We heard that in the case of the person sitting right next to you, Special Agent Heller Drake. Where and when do people actually get fired? When is there the accountability? And I think that has a much more detrimental effect on the rest of the 16,000 employees who are good, hard-working, patriotic people. They work hard. They're doing good for their country. But when they don't see justice served, they're left to think that there is no justice. And that is fundamentally wrong. That's the overarching point. I'm not trying to pick on any one person, but when somebody is giving bonuses to their own daughter out of their account, that's a problem. And I don't know why it takes months to figure it out. When we have an employee who's looking at over 600 porn sites in a 4-day period and it's there in black and white, fire them. That's the message, I guess, we're trying to convey back, and I look forward to working with you. I appreciate you sitting here. You're braver than most to come in and chat with Congress. Coming before Congress is not necessarily a fun thing, but that's our concern, is holding people accountable.
First of all, on the last comment, I want you all to understand I view this as my sacred responsibility to work with you. So you can ask me whatever you want. And what I don't want to do is not so much a legal thing as the Chairman was alluding to. I don't want to say something
Understood.
as one of the leaders of the agency that could bias and give an out or something else for somebody who's going to undergo an administrative
Understood. And I think the point has made, and I know you've heard it, the IG has a critical function. There are no ifs, ands, buts, excuses to not give the IG. They should have the first crack at that. They're the ones that are trained professionals in doing that. And my only message again to Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Williams, don't let them push you around. Don't go entering into some voluntary, we're going to stand down. You never stand down. That's what the IG, I need to hear from the IG. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman from California seek recognition. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Concern for national security played a significant role on how the John Beale case was handled. Last October, we explored how fears about blowing Mr. Beale's cover with the CIA allowed him to penetrate a fraud against the agency and the government. It may be hard to understand now, but at the time, EPA officials believed Mr. Beale did not suspect him of lying to them. Therefore, they were trying to protect his cover story, not prove that it was a fraud. Mr. Prochaska, given what people thought at the time, what was the logic in tapping the OHS and deciding not to inform the IG immediately about Mr. Beale?
So I think you had some of the context there. This obviously had been going on for 10 years through multiple administrations, many different assistant administrators, different parties. There was, this has just been going on. In many respects, it's a classic confidence game where you gain everybody's confidence and then you abuse that confidence. It's probably more complicated than that, but I'm just being simple here. So when this really started to come to a head, and we were saying, how could this be? People were raising the questions, as has been pointed out here several times. The sense was, and again, I already testified here that in hindsight I would have asked people to do something differently, but in this instance, whenever I was asked about it, and I think other people, it was like, well, there must be some human resources record keeping here that would say whether he is or isn't doing these things. And when those folks didn't have any records, the General Counsel's office asked the office that is the liaison with the intelligence community, the Office of Homeland Security, what they knew about it. And here's where we get into the situation I think that Mr. Sullivan brought up. If they had just tried to check their records to see what was going on, I don't think the IG would have had an issue with that. But they had an issue with, they went and interviewed the guy. Now, as it turns out, and I want to be really clear about that, because the fears of what could happen when you do that and you tip people off are real, and I think they're more expert in those potential problems than I am. But in this case, I am personally pleased in terms of the message sending and everything else, that this employee is now spending almost 3 years in jail and has paid back not only the $900,000 that we discovered he defrauded, but $500,000 more, in calculating what he might have financially benefited from having that other money. So he's paid back already to the Federal Treasury $1.4 million, and he's spending 3 years in jail. And I wish things had gone smoother when we got through that, but that's the current situation we're in. And that is the best rationale I could give you, which is probably not the best one in hindsight, but that's how I think it got into the Office of Homeland Security.
So, Mr. Chespi, once OHS discovered that Mr. Beale was not affiliated with the CIA, how long did it take for EPA to refer the matter to IG?
I think, my memory is not precise on this, but I think they looked at it for maybe 3 months, and then they turned it over to the Office of Inspector General.
Mr. Sullivan, how long, could you confirm with us how long was your investigation once the IG was involved?
We were informed on February 11, 2013, and we immediately put a number of agents on the case. And within 3 months, 3.5 months, we had a plea agreement with Mr. Beal and his attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So within 3.5 months, we had kind of brought it to at least the initial conclusion, and then it went through the process of him being the formal plea and then the formal sentencing.
Okay. So, Mr. Sullivan, in your testimony, you stated that you cannot assure us that the IG is doing everything possible to root other John Beals who may be at the EPA. Are you suggesting that there could be people masquerading as CIA employees currently working at the EPA?
No, sir. I have no visibility on that, and I don't expect that would be true. But I do have a very real, abiding concern that the Office of Homeland Security is interviewing employees, collecting information on employees engaged in misconduct, and not telling us. And that's a major issue for me and my staff, and a major issue for the Inspector General.
Okay. Mr. Prochaska, are there any valid reasons why the EPA would not cooperate timely in a fully and timely manner with the IG on other investigations?
And I think we got into this, is this an exception before, but I think our standard operating procedure is that we always do that. We always cooperate with the IG fully. In this case, and again, I think another year in the future, maybe we'll have a joint different view of it, but in this case, we've temporarily, by mutual agreement, have delayed completing the investigation of the issues in the Office of Homeland Security.
Yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Recognize myself now. 3 months that they knew this guy was a fraud, and they didn't turn it over to the IG. Would you agree, Mr. Prochaska, that that's 3 months longer than it should ever happen? 3 months to the minute that they knew that this was a matter of a fraudulent employee and not a national security individual.
Yeah, I don't know when during that time period they made that revelation to themselves, but I've already testified that I think in hindsight I would have recommended, to the extent that I would have had a role in that, to do something different.
And of course, hindsight's always good. In hindsight, we know that basically the administrator, a cabinet-level position, makes one phone call in a secured environment and finds out whether somebody is in fact a clandestine agent, that for some reason the entity who has a responsibility to tell them that that's their agent, because the agency head is to be informed, in fact would be told, no, that isn't, and we can verify that. Reading the law, you now know, as the deputy, that if you have any embedded individuals in that category, you have to be informed.
Yes, as I understand it, although I have to admit, and maybe this is my problem, I did not know that when that law had changed since I came back to the Federal Government. But as I understand it, and I'll look to behind me and in front of me here, that if that ever was the case, that the cabinet-level person and their general counsel are to be informed.
Now, I understand that, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Williams, you can't say that whether there is or isn't another Beal embedded. But there are people who are being paid and they're not working. You've recently discovered, you said like 71 cases. I mean, you know that in fact bosses are falsifying documents so that people get paid who are not working. Is that right? You have enough of these examples that you clearly know that if there's this many, there's more, right?
Well, you don't know what you don't know, Mr. Chairman, but we do have a number of cases in which employees have not shown up for work but have been paid, yes.
So when you keep seeing that, eventually what you see is that at least two things exist. One is it's happened enough times that it probably will happen again if it's not happening today. And secondly, because the Justice Department has declined to prosecute again and again, including the example of a 20-year, 5 years completely unable even to log in No prosecution. You know that to be true.
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, for us as investigators, we collect the facts presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they make a decision based on their resources. But it is quite common to get a declination. That's correct, sir.
And Mr. Pertusepi, when you have somebody who bonuses with taxpayer dollars their own daughter in a way that was designed clearly to circumvent anyone knowing that, because whether she hired the employee herself or simply made sure that the money out of her budget got there to make a bonus available, and there's a decline to prosecute, do you believe it's your obligation to go back to Justice to ask them to reconsider, and did you do that?
I have no authority to, I think, go back to Justice and ask them to do something.
You mean you can't say, as the number 2 at the EPA to the number 2 at the Attorney General's office, are you guys sure you don't have a case? Is this a matter of you don't have a case, or that you're just too busy to do these white-collar crimes? Do you have the authority to ask that question?
I misunderstood your question. I don't know what the exact thing that the IG does when they send it to the U.S. attorneys. I think it's like a warrant or what form?
I assume it's a criminal referral.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but however, though—
My question was, my answer was only I don't have the authority to do a criminal referral, but of course I could—
They've done a criminal referral. It's come back as a decline to prosecute. You have a management problem, which is you have multiple people, and Ms. Heller, I'm going to hear from you in a moment, but including people with anger management problems. Because they're not prosecuting, it comes back to you. That means you have a management problem. The political appointees over at the Department of Justice are supposed to be sympathetic to your management problem if crimes were committed and it's affecting your ability to do your job, because it takes you a long time, if at all, to get rid of somebody who's a criminal but technically not being prosecuted. Isn't that the case?
I don't know what instances we have where somebody's a criminal and I don't know.
Bonusing your own daughter.
Well,
crime. Signing false, you know it. Signing 5 years of somebody who isn't working, you know they're not working. The fact is, they're unable to work. They should be put on disability. Claiming for a year that somebody, or multiple years, or somebody in a nursing home is in fact telecommuting. You know, I have deep concerns about telecommuting because it definitely opens up the ability for somebody sick, lame, lazy, or dead to get paid if we have no checks and balances on people who sign off saying this person's doing work. So I'll leave that for a moment and I'll go on to the main event. Well, let me rephrase that. Ms. Heller, I said I would give you time, and I want to make sure that I give you time. You're a victim of somebody with anger management. That entire case is sitting there waiting for another investigation, another IG to look into it. And that individual is still doing their job, and you're unable to get back to the job, you and the other people from the Inspector General, that you were doing when you were assaulted. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Now, you said this in your opening statement. You're a woman with a gun. You're somebody who's law enforcement trained, and this was incredibly frightening to you. This was something that really put you in a feeling of this man could go off in the worst possible way, and it shocked you. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you're not easy to shock, are you?
Not at all.
Now, the thousands of men or thousands of women at EPA who don't enjoy your level of training and preparation, including how to normally diffuse, who don't carry a firearm, somebody like this in the workplace, including his direct reports, that they're still being potentially assaulted every day in the workplace, aren't they?
Yes, sir.
How do you feel about that?
It's extremely disconcerting.
I never want to feel like there's nothing I can do. So I'm going to tell you that this is going to be an ongoing, daily part of communication with EPA. Additionally, my office will be sending out, I'll ask the ranking member to join me, to every Cabinet position an inquiry based on what we heard today asking how many other administrative delays in which somebody who has been accused, apparently very validly, of inappropriate behavior not once but multiple times is still on the job. I know that the ranking member, if he were sitting here still, would agree that zero tolerance is what the President has promised us. It's what the Administrator, I'm sure, would promise us, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep the Administration focused on cleaning house, at least of people still being managers and in the workplace after the kind of thing you experienced.
Thank you.
I'm going to close, and I'll give all of you a last word, but Deputy Administrator Persepi, I have a problem that needs to be resolved at close. Your agency has, in fact, failed to comply with subpoenas. You know it. It's been a long time. This is your second trip back, failure to comply. Additionally, your process for collecting information is unacceptable, and I'm just going to go through it briefly. Mr. Sullivan, if you're looking for emails, my understanding, Mr. Williams, you access EPA computers and you draw the emails you need based on keyword search. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Would you ever ask the gentleman, I use that word loosely, that assaulted Ms. Heller, would you ever ask him and others to look and see if they have emails responsive to some inquiry into them that you're doing?
No, sir, we would not.
Then, Director, Administrator, why is it that when we send you a subpoena, your procedure is self-search? You essentially call up the people who we're looking into, and you ask EPA employees to self-search their emails. And by the way, you're self-searching if they believe that they have documents potentially responsive, rather than having your general counsel or your IGs or anybody else who is by definition not under investigation do the search and deliver us the documents. Do you understand how that procedure is inherently open and fraught with obstruction, that an individual who gets to search their own emails gets to keep you from being culpable in obstructing, but in fact may very well be taking the documents out that we most want to have and most deserve to have? Do you understand that?
I could see that possibility.
Do you understand that if you do not fully comply with a subpoena of this committee or any committee of the Congress, that you can and will be held in contempt?
I can't imagine a situation where we will not comply.
You have not complied. Well, at some point. What's the date of the subpoena? Do you know when October was? Okay.
Hoping just last year, right?
Yeah, just last year. Although Lois Lerner's emails haven't been provided by Treasury either. My patience has expired.
Okay.
I want full cooperation and discovery and delivery of all relevant documents, and I will be asking that you certify in a letter, signed letter, that you believe you have fully complied, and that you do so within 1 month total. It is my intention to bring to this committee a contempt if that is not done.
Okay.
It is necessary because running the clock of we'll get you something sometime is going on. In the case of Lois Lerner's emails from Treasury, either myself or a special prosecutor needs to have all of those emails. That's another Cabinet position. But understand here today that the Speaker's willingness to work with and allow delay has expired, and that's why we have requests for a special prosecutor in the IRS case, and in Benghazi on the House floor today, we will be taking the next step with a select committee. This branch of government's time and willingness to cooperate with delay and denial has expired. It is clear that the President you work for and the administration you work for has a delay and deny capability and plan, and has since the beginning. It is now very clear from other documents. So it's time for you to realize that Your time is limited. I do not expect you to run the clock to the end of the month. That's when I would, or for a month, because in a month from now I would have scheduled a contempt. So we expect immediate cooperation. If you have any technical problems, please work with us, but notwithstanding a technical limitation, we'll expect full compliance. And I said I'd give you all a final word. I'll start with you, Administrator.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I understand what you just said. And my understanding is there's dialogue ongoing with the staff, but I will obviously go back and push ahead. Let me say in somewhat conclusion to the overall discussion that we've had here today, people ask me about concerns with management at EPA. You know, I'm the Deputy Administrator. I'm always concerned about management at EPA. And my partner in helping me deal with management at EPA is the IG. And in fact, since the Beale occurrence happened, we've been able to dissect many different weaknesses that have sat in the agency for years, and we are in the process of correcting them. Some of the things on time and attendance that you just talked about, we are putting in systems that will not enable that to go on the way it has been, to provide tools for the managers so that they get these exception reports and then they have to elevate them. And so while we've had the policies, and I think we talked about this last time, and I think you have very good personal knowledge on how systems can help, you know, managers manage better, we're trying to run into that as fast as we can, and we're trying to do it in a way in partnership with the IG as we get their reviews of the different administrative procedures. So I think upgrading management at EPA is definitely something I am working personally on for the Administrator. We have done things already. There's more that we have to do. And I also want to make sure I commit to the committee here that the Administrator's meeting next week is designed to break the logjam so we can move forward on some of the other issues that you've heard about today. And as soon as we can get done with the work with the Department of Defense, we will move expeditiously on whatever that discovers in terms of Special Agent Heller.
I appreciate that. I might want to make sure the record is clear that some of your employees in working with the staff have asserted that there may be an executive privilege claim in the case of documents with the White House. We've recently seen White House documents as to the false and misleading statements after Benghazi about the video that wasn't a factor at all but was being led. It is the intent of the Speaker, clearly, that documents that are appropriate, even if they go to the White House, are discoverable, such as those. In this case, these are documents that you will have to assert and provide a privilege log if one exists. Otherwise, we expect full discovery, and we cannot accept we may, on some, have executive privilege. Document by document, the President must assert executive privilege. He's not reluctant to do it, but we expect him to do it or we expect discovery. So I want to make it clear, these, you know, working with staff is a discussion. Producing or document by document claiming executive privilege is in fact something that the President has to decide with the Administrator. Ms. Heller, any closing remarks?
Sir, I don't have any closing remarks except to say thank you so much for inviting me today and allowing me to share my experience.
Thank you for coming here. It's always courageous to come as an individual and as a victim of workplace violence or harassment, and I appreciate it, and thank you for your service. Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss our employee integrity cases, and we appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to underscore my previous testimony that in general, our relationship with Administrator McCarthy and Deputy Administrator Perciasepe is outstanding. However, in this one area involving the Office of Homeland Security, it is completely dysfunctional, and I want to underscore that we will, in fact, look forward to the meetings in the future. Bottom line is this, though, sir. We cannot negotiate away our authority under the IG Act, and we absolutely will insist that we be notified immediately of any allegation of misconduct.
I appreciate that, and I will close by saying the ranking member has been working on an ex parte basis to try to resolve that, and obviously it didn't work before this. My intention is, of course, to be inclusive of the ranking member, but I will be talking to SIGI which has a coordination obligation, because it is my opinion that very clearly, and you're right, Mr. Sullivan, an IG cannot negotiate away or defer on that which is the independent responsibility. And an administrator asking for a stand down has, if you least the whiff, the air of a failure to respect the independence of the IG. A day or a week is not uncommon. People can certainly go work on other things. But this has gone on long enough that it now represents a real question about the integrity of that investigation has been on a hiatus. So I will be talking to Siggy later today. I'll talk to the ranking member. But this is an ongoing interest of this committee that every day that goes by we'll be asking key staff to ask you, has it been resolved? And I expect that at least there will be a, this is what we did today, or this is what we did tomorrow. So I want to thank you. This is not an easy hearing. Some even questioned the title, but I think the title reflected at least a portion of what is, in fact, an agency that we want to stay active and engaged with on a number of issues in order to do our job of oversight and make sure that the systems you want to put into place are put into place in a timely fashion. I want to thank all of the witnesses, and we stand adjourned.